Imagine closing your eyes and standing on land that stretches farther than your mind can measure. There are no oceans to block your way, no familiar coastlines to mark an edge. Wherever you turn, the horizon is just more land, endless and unbroken, as if the earth decided to gather all its pieces into a single puzzle. This is not the earth, This is Earth as it was hundreds of millions of years ago, during the time of Pangaea, the great supercontinent. If this quiet journey through deep time soothes you, let it linger. And if you find comfort drifting through these landscapes of history, I gently invite you to support this channel with a like and subscribe. It helps these stories continue, so that together we can wander through time beneath the stillness of night. Now let's take slow steps back into that ancient world. The age of Pangaea was a time before our world had the map we recognize. Instead of separate continents, all land was pressed together into one vast expanse. You could, in theory, walk from what is now North America to what is now Africa without ever touching the sea. That walk, though, would not be easy. The land in between was a shifting mosaic of swamps, deserts, and forests, all shaped by climates far harsher than most of what we know today. There's something oddly funny about this. Humans today complain about crossing town traffic, yet in Pangaea, a journey might stretch thousands of kilometers with no hint of coastline to reward you at the end. The earth itself seemed to say, no shortcuts, only endless land. But before we sink into the details, we must place ourselves in the right moment of time. Pangaea came together about 335 million years ago, in the late Paleozoic era. By around 175 million years ago, it had already begun to split apart, slowly tearing itself into the continents that drifted toward the positions we know today. It was a short-lived experiment in Earth's history, but one that left scars in the rocks, clues in the fossils, and stories in the winds. Close your eyes and breathe. Around you, the air is thick, almost heavy. During parts of Pangaea's existence, the atmosphere carried more oxygen than what you breathe now, sometimes as much as 30 to 35%, compared to our 21% today. That higher oxygen helped fuel giant life forms. Imagine dragonflies the size of hawks, their wings nearly a meter across, gliding above swampy forests. Picture millipede-like arthropods, some longer than a human is tall, creeping along under the shadows of towering trees. It's a good reminder that size is not always an advantage. After all, a dragonfly the size of a bird may sound impressive, but it also makes you an easier target for whatever is hungry and lurking below. Still, these creatures thrived because the air itself allowed them to. Breathing in Pangaea would feel strange to us, like drawing deeper gulps of life with every inhale. Walk with me now toward the forests that blanketed parts of the supercontinent. These were not the same forests we know today. The trees of the Carboniferous period, before and during the early assembly of Pangaea, were primitive yet immense. Giant ferns, club mosses, and horsetails grew into towering groves. Their roots tangled in swampy ground, while their leaves spread wide, trapping humidity beneath a green canopy. If you could listen closely, the forest would hum with insects, buzzing, clattering, whirring, filling the air with sound. In between, amphibians croaked, their calls echoing through the damp undergrowth. Reptiles, early ones with strange shapes, crept quietly across the soil. The ground was rich with decaying plant matter, building layers that would one day transform into coal seams, the very same coal that fuels parts of our world today. And here lies one of the soft ironies of Pangaea. Millions of years ago, its forests thrived, died, and pressed themselves into the earth. Now humans dig up those remains to power the modern world. Imagine the trees of Pangaea whispering, "We warmed the earth once before. Now you're doing it again." The building of Pangaea itself was not peaceful. It was a story of continents colliding, smashing into each other with unimaginable force. The land did not simply slide together like puzzle pieces. It crumpled, folded, and thrust upward. From those collisions rose new mountain ranges. Today, geologists still trace their scars across distant lands. The Appalachians in North America, for example, were once connected to mountains in what is now northern Africa. They are siblings torn apart by oceans, but still carrying the same geological DNA. It is humbling to think that when you hike the Appalachians, you are walking on land once welded together in Pangaea's great assembly. Every stone, every ridge is a frozen memory of continents colliding. But Pangaea was not just about forests and mountains. It was also a land of extremes. The interior of the supercontinent was so far from the sea that moisture rarely reached it. Vast deserts sprawled across the heartland, stretching for thousands of kilometers. Imagine a desert larger than anything alive today, where the horizon itself felt like a mirage. The sun beat down relentlessly in rivers when they existed at all, often ran briefly before vanishing into sand or stone. Here, life had to be tough. Reptiles evolved bodies that conserved water, skin that resisted drying, and behaviors that allowed them to survive in blistering heat. Some burrowed underground to escape the sun. Others became masters of stillness, conserving every drop of energy. Small animals darted between shadows, while larger predators wandered carefully, conserving strength in a land where mistakes could be fatal. Even the air told this story. Dust storms from the desert interior swept outward, carrying minerals across the land and even into the oceans that surrounded Pangaea. In this way, even emptiness became a source of life, feeding ecosystems far from the desert's reach. The earth has always known how to recycle, long before humans learned the word. Let us pause here on the edge of desert and forest. Behind us lies the green humidity of Pangaea's ancient woods, buzzing with oversized insects. Ahead, a horizon of red rock and sand, vast and unbroken. The contrast is sharp, almost dizzying. But this was the reality of a single landmass stretching across multiple climate zones. From icy southern sheets to tropical equatorial forests, Pangaea contained everything, every possible climate, every extreme. Perhaps this was its most defining feature. One world bound together, yet filled with endless contrasts. No other moment in Earth's history has carried quite the same unity. And so, as we take a step deeper into this supercontinent, remember, this is not just land. It is the stage upon which life adapted, struggled, and prepared for the future. For within Pangaea's forests, swamps, deserts, and mountains lived the ancestors of creatures that would one day rule the earth. The dinosaurs, the mammals, and much later, us. Stand now at the banks of a river that carves its way across the vastness of Pangaea. It is not a short stream, not a modest trickle hidden in woodland. This is a river that runs for thousands of kilometers, crossing lands that in our time would span multiple continents. Its waters gleam under the sun, flowing steadily from upland mountains into the heart of the supercontinent, carrying with them life, minerals, and the promise of survival. Rivers in Pangaea were not just waterways. They were lifelines. Along their banks, amphibians lingered in the mud, waiting patiently for insects that buzzed in clouds overhead. Reptiles scuttled across the warm stones, sunning themselves before sliding back into shaded burrows. Ferns and seed plants clung to the edges of the current, their roots binding the soil and stabilizing the ground. Insects swarmed above them, their wings catching glimmers of sunlight. The sound were constant: croaks, chirps, the slap of tails in water, the buzz of dragonflies so large that you might mistake them for birds. Life here depended on the steady rhythm of the river. And, in a way, the river was the quiet pulse of Pangaea itself. If you followed this river far enough, you would eventually notice something peculiar. It does not end in an ocean quickly, not as our rivers often do today. Instead, it might wander for unimaginable distances before finally reaching the sea, or perhaps disappear into desert sands, swallowed by the dry air of the continental interior. Some rivers never made it to the coast at all. They would begin bravely, cutting their paths through rock and soil, only to fade into emptiness, vanishing without a trace. There's a quiet irony in that. Imagine being an ancient amphibian, following a river in hopes of reaching wetter ground, only to discover that it dies in front of you, like a mirage. Life in Pangaea was often a gamble like this, abundant in places, scarce in others, with the line between survival and failure drawn by geography itself. Yet not all of Pangaea was harsh. Near the coasts, where moisture gathered, forests flourished. These were not the gentle woodlands we know today, but towering green corridors of primitive trees. Some were conifer-like, stretching skyward with resinous wood that resisted decay. Others were sprawling seed ferns, their wide leaves spreading into thick canopies. Together they trapped humidity, creating enclosed worlds beneath their branches. Walk beneath them, and you would smell damp soil, the musk of rotting leaves, and the sharp tang of resin dripping from bark. Mist rolled in from the nearby ocean, curling between trunks and clinging to your skin. The air itself felt alive, heavy with oxygen and filled with the constant rustle of unseen creatures. In these forests, early reptiles prowled quietly, their scales blending with dappled light. Small synapsids, creatures that looked like reptile-mammal hybrids, nibbled at ferns. Their teeth were shaped for grinding, their bodies built for conserving water. They were awkward prototypes of mammals yet to come, carrying within them the faint blueprint of warm-bloodedness and endurance. Above, giant dragonflies glided on slow wing beats. Insects, freed by the abundance of oxygen, seemed almost boastful in their size, as though Pangaea had given them a license to exaggerate. One wonders if early reptiles looked up and thought the same thing we might. That is one bug too big for comfort. But Pangaea's forests were more than backdrops for oversized insects. They were engines of change. The thick vegetation pulled carbon dioxide from the air and released oxygen, shifting the very chemistry of the atmosphere. The decay of these forests created deep layers of plant matter, compressed over millions of years into coal. Today, humans mine that coal, burning it to fuel machines, releasing back into the sky the gases trapped when Pangaea was young. It's a strange loop, almost comical in its repetition. Ancient forests lock away carbon. Humans dig it up, and the planet warms again. If Pangaea had a voice, it might chuckle dryly and say, "I've seen this trick before. Step away now from the forests and climb into the mountains." These ranges, born of colliding plates, rose as jagged scars along the seams of Pangaea. Some were as tall and dramatic as the Himalayas are today. Others have worn down with time, leaving only ridges and rolling highlands. But in their prime, they were dramatic reminders of how violently the earth assembles itself. Here the air thins, and the winds whistle sharply through rocky passes. Snow clings to the peaks in the far south, where glaciers stretch outward, pressing against the edges of the supercontinent. Lower down, rivers pour from melting ice, carrying sediments into fertile plains. These sediments enrich the land, spreading nutrients across valleys and floodplains, feeding forests and grass-like plants. The mountains, though harsh, were essential. They fed the rivers, redirected winds, and created microclimates. They were the bones of Pangaea, shaping everything around them. Even today, long after the supercontinent cracked apart, geologists trace their remains. The Appalachians of North America, the Scottish Highlands, and the Anti-Atlas of Morocco were once a single range, joined shoulder to shoulder. Imagine a chain that stretched unbroken from one side of the supercontinent to the other. Now those pieces are scattered, each mountain range isolated, like siblings separated by oceans. And then there were the deserts. If the forests were Pangaea's lungs and the rivers its veins, the deserts were its empty stomach. They sprawled across the continental interior in red expanses of sand and rock. No modern desert compares. The Sahara, vast as it is, feels almost modest next to these ancient drylands. Walk into one, and the world becomes silence. The sun strikes mercilessly. The sand glows red with iron, staining the ground and even the bones of creatures that perish there. Animals adapted to these harsh conditions were small, quick, and resourceful. Some burrowed to escape heat. Others evolved to lose little water. Their survival was a daily negotiation with the desert itself. From time to time, storms rose, immense walls of dust that swallowed the horizon. These storms did more than scour the land. They carried minerals outward, spreading them into distant forests and even out to the shallow seas. The desert, though barren, became an unlikely benefactor, feeding ecosystems far from its reach. It is an odd lesson that even emptiness has value. A desert may seem lifeless, but its dust sustained abundance elsewhere. If you could stand in the middle of Pangaea and look around, it might have been overwhelming. No ocean to mark an end, no comforting coastline, only land stretching outward in every direction. The horizon itself seemed farther away, as though the planet had grown larger. That sense of scale would have defined daily life, not only for animals, but for the very air, winds, and rains that shape the climate. The size of Pangaea created its own weather patterns. Winds traveled vast distances without obstruction. Monsoons swept across coasts with rains that lasted for weeks. In the interior, storms were rare, but when they came, they pushed dry air outward, shifting climates across the entire supercontinent. Imagine lying beneath the canopy of a coastal forest, listening to the endless patter of rain, or standing in the desert interior, hearing nothing at all, only the faint rasp of wind moving across sand. Pangaea was a world of contrasts, yet all of it was connected, bound by the same atmosphere, the same restless heartbeat of the earth beneath it. Here we pause again, standing in the middle of a supercontinent that was both unified and divided, abundant and harsh. Forests breathed oxygen into the skies. Deserts spread dust into distant seas. Rivers tied ecosystems together like veins in a living body. Every part of Pangaea was connected to every other, a single world stitched tightly together. And in this setting, life was not static. It was adapting, experimenting, pushing into new forms that would shape the next chapters of Earth's story. Step gently now into the shade of a conifer grove on Pangaea's coastal plain. The air here is warm and humid, filled with the sound of insects buzzing lazily through shafts of sunlight. A gentle mist clings to the roots, rolling in from a distant sea. It feels calm, but listen closer, and you will hear the movements of creatures, shapes of life, both familiar and strange. On the forest floor, a synapsid moves slowly, its body broad, its teeth flat and suited for chewing hardy ferns. It is neither fully reptile nor fully mammal, but something in between. Its skin is thick and scaled, yet its posture hints at the sturdier stance of mammals to come. These were the creatures that carried in their bones the blueprint of the future. The first steps toward warm-blooded endurance and complex behaviors. One of the most recognizable among them was Dimetrodon, though to call it a dinosaur, as people sometimes do, would be a mistake. Dimetrodon lived long before dinosaurs appeared. Its most striking feature was a tall sail rising from its back, formed by elongated spines connected with skin. Some scientists believe it used this sail to regulate body temperature, soaking up morning sun or releasing excess heat by turning into the wind. Others suggest it might have been for display, a prehistoric billboard saying, "Look at me, I am larger, stronger, or simply stranger than you." Imagine such a creature resting in the sun, its sail casting a long shadow through the ferns, while insects the size of small birds skimmed overhead. A quiet forest scene, except for the occasional snap of jaws when the Dimetrodon caught its prey. But predators were never alone. Where there were hunters, there were also the hunted. Herbivorous synapsids browsed through the undergrowth, their teeth worn from grinding the fibrous plants of the time. Some carried smaller sails. Others had broad, barrel-shaped bodies built for digesting tough vegetation. They moved slowly, deliberately, conserving energy in a world where food was abundant in some seasons and scarce in others. Nearby, amphibians clung to the edges of rivers and swamps. They had not yet cut their ties to the water, needing its protection to reproduce. Their calls echoed across the wetlands at dusk, a chorus that must have carried for kilometers through the still air. These amphibians were reminders of an older world, the one before reptiles claimed the land. They lingered in the shadows while their cousins, more daring, ventured farther inland with hard-shelled eggs that freed them from rivers and ponds. Insects, too, played their part. The giant dragonflies of the Carboniferous had already begun to shrink by Pangaea's height, as oxygen levels fluctuated. Still, they remained impressive. Delicate wings stretched wide, bodies glinting in the light, darting between tree trunks with surprising grace. Millipede-like arthropods still crept through damp soil, feeding on decaying plants, their long segmented bodies leaving trails in the mud. It is amusing to imagine how one of these oversized insects might look to us today. A dragonfly with wings nearly a meter across would certainly turn heads at a picnic. Yet in Pangaea's forests, they were part of the normal rhythm of life. No more startling than the buzz of a mosquito is to us now. Nature always adjusts its sense of scale to fit the times. Life in Pangaea was shaped as much by climate as by biology. In the coastal forests, lush and damp, animals found food and shelter. In the deserts, survival demanded innovation. Small reptiles developed tough, water-conserving skins. Some burrowed deep to escape heat. Others moved mostly at night, avoiding the harshest hours of the sun. Even their behaviors carried a kind of wisdom. A creature that could sit still for hours, conserving energy, might survive where another, more restless, would perish. Pangaea rewarded patience as much as strength. And then, of course, there were the early predators of the Triassic, the forerunners of dinosaurs yet to come. As Pangaea's climate shifted and new niches opened, reptilian hunters began to grow larger, faster, and more specialized. Long jaws lined with sharp teeth snapped shut on prey, while strong limbs carried them across open ground. This was the beginning of an arms race. Herbivores grew larger to defend themselves, and predators followed suit. It is tempting to imagine this as a kind of prehistoric competition, with creatures constantly one-upping each other like rivals in a sporting match. Oh, you've grown 2 meters taller? Well, then I'll grow sharper teeth. Nature has no scoreboard, of course, but the result was the steady rise of larger, stronger animals. By the end of Pangaea's time, this contest would give birth to the first true giants of the Mesozoic, the dinosaurs. Still, not all of Pangaea's creatures were imposing. Many were small, quiet survivors. Tiny reptiles darted through the leaf litter, feeding on insects. Burrowing animals tunneled into soil to avoid predators. In the swamps, early crocodile-like creatures slipped into the water, waiting motionless for prey. Their patience, too, was an adaptation, a reminder that in nature, stillness can be just as powerful as speed. Even the smallest creatures left their mark. Fossilized footprints from insects, amphibians, and reptiles remain pressed into rocks today, silent testaments to lives lived long ago. If you were to stumble upon such a trackway, you might feel a sense of connection, as though the ground itself remembers every step. Above all, what tied these creatures together was the atmosphere. The air of Pangaea was shared by every forest, every desert, every swamp. Oxygen levels rose and fell, influencing the size of insects. Carbon dioxide surged during volcanic eruptions, warming the planet and altering rainfall. Every creature, whether predator, herbivore, or tiny insect, lived at the mercy of the skies. Picture a volcanic eruption tearing open a fault line in Pangaea. Ash fills the air, blocking sunlight, cooling the land temporarily. Later, gases warm the planet again, fueling intense storms. The creatures that endured were those that could bend with these changes, finding new ways to survive. In that sense, resilience was the most valuable trait of all. By now, the forests hum with life. The deserts brood in silence. The rivers guide migrations, while the mountains stand as watchful bones. And across them all move the creatures of Pangaea. Synapsids with sails, reptiles with jaws of steel, amphibians lingering in damp shadows, insects gliding on oversized wings. They were not the world's final forms, not even close, but they were experiments, early drafts of what life could become. Some of their lineages would vanish entirely, leaving only fossils as whispers of their time. Others would carry forward, slowly reshaped by evolution, into the dinosaurs, mammals, and eventually into us. In this way, Pangaea was both a cradle and a crucible. It nurtured life with abundance while testing it with extremes. Every adaptation, every behavior was a quiet rehearsal for the future. As you rest in the calm of this moment, imagine walking across that world, passing from forest to desert, from river to mountain, all without crossing a sea. The same sky above you, the same air in your lungs, the same earth underfoot, and all around, creatures both strange and familiar, living out their days under the vastness of a supercontinent. Pangaea was one world, one land, one stage upon which life rehearsed the drama of survival. Stand again on the land of Pangaea and tilt your head toward the sky. The air here is restless, carrying both abundance and challenge. It is a single atmosphere that wraps the entire supercontinent, binding deserts, forests, and coasts under the same invisible skin. Yet within this unity, conditions varied so widely that the very idea of balance felt stretched. Pangaea was one world, but it was also a patchwork quilt of extremes. Near the coasts, where the sea's breath could still reach inland, rain fell often. Seasonal monsoons gathered strength from the sheer size of the landmass. Imagine warm ocean air pulled deep into the continental interior, where it met cooler winds. The clash birthed towering clouds, black with water, until at last they opened in downpours that could last for days. Rivers swelled, rushing through lowlands, flooding forests and plains. Along their banks, amphibians and reptiles emerged to feed, while insects filled the air with a constant hum. The forests, already dense with ferns and conifers, drank greedily, their roots clutching the soil against erosion. The sound of such a storm must have been overwhelming. Rain hammering leaves, rivers roaring, thunder rolling endlessly overhead. For weeks at a time, the coastal regions of Pangaea pulsed with water, their ecosystems thriving on the rhythm of the monsoon. And then just as suddenly, the skies would clear, leaving behind steaming lowlands and the smell of wet earth. Travel inward, though, and the picture changes dramatically. The heart of Pangaea lay so far from the sea that moisture rarely reached it. The result was a desert like no other, vast, unbroken, stretching for thousands of kilometers. Here silence reigned. Wind whispered across sand dunes, carving ripples that looked like frozen waves. The ground was often hard and cracked, baked red by the iron-rich rocks beneath. Only scattered rivers, brief and unreliable, cut across the emptiness, and even they sometimes faded into sand before reaching their end. Creatures that lived here were specialists in endurance. Small reptiles burrowed deep underground to escape the heat. Their bodies conserved water with remarkable efficiency. Their skin toughened against the dry air. Some may have been active only during the cooler twilight hours, moving quickly between patches of shadow. Larger animals ventured cautiously, often bearing the marks of adaptation. Wide, flat feet to walk across soft sand, or thick skins to resist drying winds. Dust storms swept across this landscape, lifting fine grains into the air until the sky itself seemed tinted red. These storms were destructive in the moment, but they carried minerals outward. Over time, this dust drifted far beyond the desert, settling in rivers, forests, and even in shallow seas at the continent's edges. In this way, the desert, though barren, fed life far away. It is almost a kind of irony. A place so empty still managed to nourish abundance elsewhere. And then there was the sea itself, Pangaea, the great ocean that surrounded Pangaea. From the shore, it stretched into an endless horizon, a deep and restless body of water covering most of the earth. Its currents moved in vast gyres, circling uninterrupted by continents, driving weather systems across the globe. Within its depths lived a rich web of marine life. Fossils from ancient seabeds reveal fishes of many forms, invertebrates with ornate shells, and predators that patrolled the waters long before the first dinosaurs set foot on land. Plankton bloomed near coasts, fueled by nutrients carried in from rivers and deserts alike. These tiny organisms, unseen to the eye, formed the foundation of oceanic abundance, feeding creatures large and small. Closer to shore, another body of water played an important role, the Tethys Sea. Sheltered by continental shelves and flanked by Pangaea's land masses, it offered calmer, shallower waters. Here, early marine species found refuge, evolving in environments shielded from the vast turbulence of Pangaea. Coral-like structures, reefs of primitive design, may have flourished in these shallows, providing homes for countless organisms. In this contrast between the wild openness of Pangaea and the calmer embrace of the Tethys Sea, life at the water's edge found both challenge and protection. The climate of Pangaea was not only vast, but also volatile. Volcanic eruptions along its fault lines released enormous amounts of carbon dioxide into the air, heating the planet in bursts of greenhouse intensity. The result was a world of climatic swings, warming phases that deepened deserts, cooling phases when ash clouds blocked sunlight, and cycles of rainfall that waxed and waned unpredictably. Forests near the coast grew lush in humid phases, their ferns and conifers expanding into dense canopies. In drier times, they shrank back, leaving behind more open landscapes where hardy plants clung stubbornly to soil. The very chemistry of the atmosphere shaped what could thrive. And when insects, once massive in the high oxygen ages, began to shrink as levels fell, dragonflies that once spanned a meter across grew smaller. Other species adapted in different ways, trading size for resilience. Reptiles, too, found their forms altered by climate. Broader sails for heat regulation, tougher skin for water conservation, stronger limbs to wander farther in search of food. It was as though the air itself was sculpting life, an invisible hand pressing its conditions into every creature. Listen now, and you can almost hear the atmosphere at work. The sigh of wind through conifer branches, the hiss of sand blown across stone, the deep, low rumble of thunder in a storm rolling in from the sea. In the deserts, silence was broken only by the rasp of air over dry earth. In the coastal forests, the air buzzed with insect wings and echoed with the calls of early reptiles. Near the seas, the smell of salt mixed with the cries of creatures living where land met water. Everywhere, the air of Pangaea tied these worlds together. It carried dust from deserts to forests, storms from oceans to coasts, minerals from land to sea. It was a single atmosphere, shared by every horizon. One might wonder how it felt to live beneath such a sky. Imagine waking at dawn in a coastal forest, breathing in humid air thick with oxygen, or trudging through the continental interior, where each breath carried the taste of dust, or sailing across Pangaea, where the wind whipped ceaselessly and the air smelled of brine. In every case, the air was more than background. It was an active force shaping ecosystems, determining which creatures thrived and which faded. Pangaea's atmosphere was not simply a blanket. It was a restless artist, painting life with broad strokes of abundance and scarcity. By now, you can see how Pangaea's scale defined everything. Its forests grew dense in moisture. Its deserts sprawled in silence. Its seas swirled with unseen currents. Life moved in response, adjusting, adapting, enduring. Some forms would vanish with the changing times. Others would carry forward, reshaped by every storm, every eruption, every shift in the air. And still, the land stood whole, one piece, vast and unbroken. To walk across it, then, would be to see the planet in a way no one can today. No distant coastline beyond the horizon. No hidden continent across the sea. Only one world, vast and connected, under the same endless sky. Rest now for a moment on the warm soil of Pangaea. Around you lies a land of extremes, forests that breathe humidity, deserts that whisper in silence, mountains that cut against the sky. Yet the most remarkable thing is not the land itself, but the creatures that walk upon it. Here, in this boundless stage, life was busy with experiments, shaping forms that would define the next chapters of Earth's story. Among the most curious of these creatures were the synapsids. They were not dinosaurs, though their bones sometimes confused the casual observer. Instead, they were closer to what would one day become mammals. Some were small, no larger than a dog, with teeth designed to chew tough plants. Others were predators heavier bodied, with jaws lined by sharp edges. We have already seen one of their stars, Dimetrodon, with its great sail. But Dimetrodon was only the opening act. Across Pangaea, synapsids came in many forms. Some carried smaller sails, perhaps for modest heat control. Others were squat and muscular, trudging slowly across floodplains in search of low-lying ferns. Their teeth hinted at specialization. Flat ridges for grinding, pointed cusps for tearing, or a mix of both. In their bones and behavior lay the whispers of mammals to be. Stronger limbs, more efficient movement, and perhaps even the first flickers of warm-bloodedness. It is almost humorous to think that the ancestors of lions, whales, and humans once resembled odd, lizard-like beasts crawling through Pangaea's undergrowth. Evolution, it seems, likes to keep its sense of irony. Meanwhile, reptiles were diversifying in their own way. Some evolved into crocodile-like forms, hugging riverbanks, their long jaws lined with teeth built for ambush. Others took to drier lands, their skins tougher, their eggs hardened against evaporation. These reptiles were not yet dinosaurs, but they were the prototypes, blueprints that evolution would later refine. Predators grew sharper, faster, more cunning. Herbivores grew broader, slower, more armored. It was an arms race without end, each side pushing the other toward new adaptations. Over millions of years, this push and pull created the foundation for the great reptilian dynasties of the Mesozoic. One can almost imagine Pangaea as a kind of evolutionary training ground, where creatures rehearse their roles before stepping onto the bigger stage of history. The rivers, as always, tied these ecosystems together. Along their banks, amphibians still lingered, holding fast to the water that defined their lives. They sang at dusk, their calls echoing in the humid air. Some reached impressive sizes, stretching longer than a human is tall. Yet they remained tied to water, unable to fully conquer the dry expanses. Reptiles and synapsids, free of this dependence, roamed farther inland. Their eggs, sealed in protective shells, were passports to the drier heartlands of Pangaea. It was this simple innovation, life carried in its own container, that allowed reptiles to dominate where amphibians could not. A shell may not seem dramatic compared to sails, jaws, or claws, but it was, in truth, one of the most revolutionary inventions in Earth's history. The amniotic egg was a small, quiet miracle, a package of life that could survive far from water. With it, Pangaea opened to creatures that would shape the future. Picture a Triassic floodplain now, where rivers swell and retreat with the seasons. Along the muddy banks, ferns and seed ferns grow thick, their roots holding the soil. Insects swarm above, buzzing in clouds, while small reptiles dart between shadows. A herd of herbivorous synapsids grazes lazily, their blunt teeth grinding on tough vegetation. From the treeline, a predator watches, its body low, its jaws long, its eyes unblinking. When the moment comes, it charges with startling speed. The herd scatters, but one falls behind. Jaws close, silence returns, and the cycle continues. This was the daily rhythm of Pangaea. Survival, adaptation, the endless testing of forms. And yet, not all was struggle. There were moments of stillness, of simple persistence. Some creatures became specialists in doing less rather than more. Small reptiles buried themselves in sand, conserving water, moving only at night. Others developed behaviors to ride out extremes, basking when cold, hiding when hot, waiting patiently for better times. There's a quiet wisdom in that. On a continent of extremes, sometimes the best strategy was simply to endure. The forest, meanwhile, grew into new shapes. Conifers spread widely, their needle-like leaves able to withstand a range of climates. They grew tall, their trunks resinous and strong, creating vertical layers of life. Birds did not yet exist, but insects buzzed among branches, and small reptiles found refuge in the canopy. Closer to the ground, ferns and cycads spread, feeding herbivores that graze beneath. The scent of resin, damp soil, and decaying leaves filled the air. Mist drifted in from the coasts, clinging to branches before burning away under the rising sun. Forests became worlds of their own, green corridors stretching across Pangaea, linking distant regions under a shared canopy. These trees were more than scenery. They were climate engineers, stabilizing soil, cycling gases, and creating the very habitats that sustained life. In their shade, life diversified quietly, layer by layer. Overhead, the sky carried both promise and threat. Volcanic eruptions were common, sending ash into the air. Sometimes the ash cooled the planet temporarily, dimming the sun. At other times, carbon dioxide from eruptions warmed the climate, deepening deserts and intensifying storms. Creatures that survived were those that could bend with these changes, those that could take what came, whether cold shadow or relentless heat. Life in Pangaea was a test of flexibility. Stiffness often led to extinction. Adaptability, no matter how modest, was the key to continuity. By the late Triassic, the stage was almost set. Dinosaurs, still small and relatively obscure, began to appear. They were not yet the giants of the Jurassic, but lean, swift hunters and nimble herbivores already hinted at what was to come. Their posture was upright, their movement efficient, their lungs likely more advanced than those of their predecessors. They were built for endurance in a world of extremes. Next to them, mammal-like synapsids continued their quiet work of survival. Some grew smaller, adapting to niches where reptiles did not dominate. Others carried forward traits that would one day become our own. Warm blood, sharper senses, perhaps even early hints of social behavior. It was a strange balance. On one side, reptiles growing into the age of dinosaurs. On the other, synapsids laying the foundation for mammals. Two great futures began here side by side in the forests, deserts, and floodplains of Pangaea. Pause now and breathe. The world around you is alive with tension and promise. In the rivers, amphibians cling to old ways. On the plains, synapsids graze under the wary eyes of predators. In the forest, reptiles climb, insects buzz, and conifers stretch toward the sun. Overhead, the air carries both oxygen and dust, the restless memory of deserts and seas. This is Pangaea at its heart, a single land, vast and boundless, filled with creatures rehearsing the future. Some would vanish, erased by time and extinction. Others would rise, reshaped into forms we know today. But all of them, in their own way, were part of a quiet preparation for the next great acts of Earth story. Stand for a moment in silence, deep within Pangaea's heart. The air is heavy, the ground beneath you trembling faintly. At first, it feels like nothing more than the slow heartbeat of the earth, a rhythm too ancient to notice. But then it grows stronger. Stones shift underfoot, and in the distance, the horizon begins to glow red. A volcano has opened its mouth. Across Pangaea, such eruptions were not rare events. They tore through the crust where tectonic plates strained against each other, releasing fountains of molten rock, ash, and gas into the air. Whole valleys were buried beneath lava flows that hardened into black plains. Forests burned, their ferns and conifers reduced to charcoal, while animals fled or perished. For life, these eruptions were both disasters and opportunities. Ash darkened the skies, cooling the land in the short term. Plants withered, insects faltered, and animals struggled to find food. Yet when the eruption ended, the land was remade. Volcanic soils rich in minerals fed new forests. Fresh rivers cut through hardened rock, carving fertile floodplains. What fire destroyed, it also renewed. It is difficult not to hear a kind of grim humor in this. The earth, like a stern gardener, clearing the ground with fire before planting again. But not all upheavals were so generous. Around 252 million years ago, near the close of the Permian period, the Earth endured one of the greatest catastrophes in its history, the Permian-Triassic extinction event. Often called the Great Dying, it swept across land and sea alike, erasing more than 90% of marine species and around 70% of land-dwelling species. Imagine standing then, as forests thinned to nothing, as rivers ran empty of life, as insects that once filled the air with sound grew silent. The great swamps of the Carboniferous, which had fed dragonflies with meter-wide wings, vanished. Synapsids and reptiles fell in number. Their once diverse forms reduced to a few hardy survivors. Oceans, too, turned hostile, as warming waters and depleted oxygen suffocated creatures from the smallest plankton to the largest predators. It was as if the earth pressed a reset button, wiping the slate almost clean. The causes of this great dying were complex. Massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia released vast amounts of gases, carbon dioxide, methane, sulfur compounds, into the air. The greenhouse effect intensified, heating the planet and making the interior deserts even harsher. At the same time, sulfur in the air blocked sunlight, chilling regions temporarily. Acid rain fell, burning through leaves and soils. In the seas, warming waters and falling oxygen created dead zones, where even the strongest swimmers could not survive. The land grew barren. The seas turned silent. For a moment, in deep time, Earth's future seemed uncertain. And yet, even here, life endured. Some synapsids, small and efficient, clung to survival. Their compact bodies needed less food and water, giving them an edge in a world stripped of abundance. Reptiles with tough skins and resilient lungs endured in pockets where conditions were less severe. Insects, adaptable and numerous, found ways to persist even as forests collapsed. It is remarkable and quietly humbling that from this shattered world came the seeds of everything that followed. Out of the ashes of extinction, new lineages rose. Early archosaurs, relatives of crocodiles and dinosaurs, spread into niches left empty by fallen competitors. Synapsids that survived laid the groundwork for mammals. The stage was cleared painfully and violently, but life stepped forward again. There's an old saying that resilience is simply persistence with patience. Pangaea's survivors embodied that truth. Picture the land just after the Great Dying. Vast plains lay empty, forests sparse, rivers quiet. The air, once thick with the sounds of insects, amphibians, and reptiles, was subdued. Yet slowly, green began to return. Hardy seed ferns pushed through the ash. Conifers spread again where soils recovered. Insects buzzed cautiously back into the air. And in the quiet, small reptiles scuttled across the ground, their footprints pressed into damp mud that would harden into stone. These footprints remain today, silent signatures of survival. Over time, the land grew more lively. New creatures emerged, many of them strange to our eyes. Early archosaurs prowled, lean and efficient, their legs positioned more directly beneath their bodies, giving them speed and endurance. Some were predators, their jaws filled with sharp teeth. Others were herbivores, nibbling on ferns and cycads. From this stock would come the first dinosaurs, a modest beginning for a lineage that would later dominate Earth. Meanwhile, synapsids continued their quiet work of persistence. Some grew smaller, occupying nocturnal niches where reptiles did not compete as fiercely. Their bodies hinted at traits that would later define mammals. Higher metabolisms, warm blood, perhaps even hair. They were shadows of a distant future, carrying in their forms the survival strategies of our own ancestors. Life, though scarred, was beginning to rehearse again. The climate, however, did not make things easy. Volcanic activity remained frequent, the Earth's crust restless beneath the weight of Pangaea. Ash clouds shifted weather patterns. Carbon dioxide levels swung up and down, altering temperatures across the globe. Some regions grew wetter, others drier. The supercontinent was not a static world, but a restless one, always reshaping its environments. And through it all, life adapted. Forests shifted in range. Reptiles diversified. Insects found new balances in size and abundance. Amphibians, though diminished, clung to rivers and wetlands. Evolution, as always, moved quietly in the background, selecting for those that could bend, not break. If you close your eyes and imagine yourself there, you might feel both awe and unease. To stand on land so vast, to breathe air laced with volcanic gases, to watch rivers carry ash-blackened waters, it would be overwhelming. And yet, to also witness the first stirrings of new life, to see green shoots breaking through scorched soil, to hear the distant call of a reptile in a recovering forest. This would be hope embodied. Pangaea, for all its violence, was also a teacher. It reminded life that endings and beginnings are often the same thing. In the millions of years that followed the Great Dying, ecosystems rebuilt themselves. Conifers spread widely, dominating cooler regions. Cycads and seed ferns grew thick in warmer zones. Rivers and floodplains once again became corridors of abundance. Insects filled the skies, buzzing in the warm air. Small reptiles darted across the ground, their scales glinting in sunlight. And in the shadows, mammal-like synapsids endured, slowly refining the traits that would one day define a new class of animals. They were not impressive in size, but they carried resilience in their very blood. At the same time, reptiles of new design grew stronger. Some became swift hunters, others grew bulkier, feeding on the rising forests. These were the forerunners of the dinosaurs, still modest in scale, but already hinting at the giants to come. Pangaea, in this way, was both cradle and crucible. It destroyed and created, tested and rewarded, always pushing life toward resilience. And so, as you walk across this boundless land in your imagination, pause to listen. Beneath the silence of deserts, the rush of monsoons, and the roar of volcanoes lies a deeper rhythm, the persistence of life itself. Through fire and ash, through silence and storm, creatures endured. Some vanished, but enough survived to shape everything that would follow. This was Pangaea's gift, a single land, a single stage, upon which life rehearsed resilience in its purest form. The silence after catastrophe does not last forever. In the wake of the Great Dying, when forests thinned and seas grew barren, Pangaea felt stripped bare. But time, patient and unhurried, has a way of repairing even the deepest scars. Slowly, green returned. The air, though still restless with volcanic fumes and shifting winds, carried once more the sense of resin, wet soil, and growing life. At first, the landscapes were humble. Hardy seed ferns sprouted in places where ash had settled, their roots clawing through poor soils. Conifers, resilient and tough, spread widely, forming new forests along floodplains and coasts. Cycads, with their thick trunks and crown-like leaves, rose where the ground allowed. These plants were survivors, built for endurance in a world still wobbling between extremes. With plants came insects. Their buzzing, absent during the worst times, began to fill the air again. Beetles crawled over bark, dragonflies skimmed above water, and termites burrowed into rotting wood. The soundscape of Pangaea was rebuilding itself piece by piece, like an orchestra tuning its instruments before the next performance. Animals, too, began to diversify again. Amphibians, though never as dominant as before, clung stubbornly to wetlands. They croaked in the evenings, hiding in reeds and mud, feeding on the swarms of insects that had returned. Small reptiles scuttled across the ground, their bodies built for conservation, their movements quick and cautious. But most significant of all were the archosaurs, a group of reptiles that included crocodile ancestors, and eventually dinosaurs. In the aftermath of extinction, when competitors had vanished, these creatures found room to expand. Their bodies carried innovations, legs positioned more directly beneath them, allowing efficient movement, lungs that drew air more effectively, and metabolisms that hinted at endurance. Imagine one of the earliest dinosaurs, slender, no larger than a modern dog, darting through ferns in pursuit of prey. It was not yet a giant, not yet a ruler of ecosystems, but it was something new. Built for speed, balance, and persistence, it was a design with a future. Life in Pangaea was still a gamble. Forests grew lush near the coasts, but the interior remained a vast desert where survival demanded special skills. Rivers tied these worlds together, carrying nutrients from mountains to plains, dust from deserts to seas. Along their banks, life clustered, plants anchoring soil, insects feeding on decay, reptiles basking on warm stones. Floodplains became cradles of diversity. When rivers swelled, they spread nutrients widely, feeding plants that in turn fed herbivores. When they shrank, pools of water became temporary oases, drawing creatures together in uneasy gatherings. Predators lurked nearby, patient as ever. To drink was to risk becoming part of the food chain. Even in recovery, Pangaea never made life easy. But difficulty can be a gift. It presses creatures to adapt, to experiment, to endure. And those who did shaped the path forward. By the Middle Triassic, around 240 million years ago, ecosystems had regained much of their vigor. Forests stretched farther. Insects thrived in every niche. Reptiles of many forms filled the land, some sprawling like crocodiles, others running upright, their limbs carrying them swiftly across plains. Synapsids, though fewer in number, still lingered, small and resilient, refining the traits that would one day define mammals. In this bustling world, dinosaurs began to step forward. At first, they were modest, light, fast, and no taller than a human. Some were carnivorous, their teeth sharp, their bodies lean for pursuit. Others nibbled plants, moving in small groups for safety. They were not yet dominant, but they carried a quiet promise. Their efficient lungs, strong legs, and upright posture gave them an advantage in a supercontinent defined by extremes. One might say dinosaurs were the marathon runners of their age. Where other reptiles tired, they kept going. where deserts stretched endlessly. Their endurance carried them farther. On a landmass the size of Pangaea, that was no small advantage. Picture, if you will, a Triassic plain. Conifers stand tall in the distance, their needles catching the light of a low sun. The ground is dusty, broken by patches of ferns and cycads. A small herd of early plant-eating dinosaurs grazes, their heads bent low, tails stretched behind them for balance. Their skin, tough and scaled, blends with the earth tones of their world. Nearby, a predator stalks, a relative of Colophysis, perhaps, slender, swift, and alert. Its eyes fix on the herd, calculating. In a burst of speed, it charges. The herd scatters, some escaping into the cover of trees. But one falters. The predator lunges, jaws snapping, and the cycle of survival repeats itself. Scenes like this were becoming more common. Dinosaurs, still minor players, were beginning to sharpen their skills. Pangaea's climate continued to test them. Monsoons drenched the coasts, filling rivers and swamps. Deserts burned in silence, their dust storms carrying minerals outward. Volcanoes erupted now and then, reshaping landscapes with ash and fire. Yet, through it all, dinosaurs expanded. Their design was suited for a world of shifting extremes. Synapsids adapted as well, though often in quieter ways. Some took to burrowing, avoiding competition by living underground. Others shrank, becoming nocturnal, their senses tuned to darkness. These small survivors may have been overlooked in their time, but in the long view of history, they were holding onto the mammalian thread that would one day lead to us. It is strangely comforting, perhaps even amusing, to think that while dinosaurs rehearsed for dominance, our distant ancestors were scurrying in the shadows, waiting for their moment. The seas, too, told their story. Along the Tethys Sea, shallow waters teemed with life. Fish darted in schools, invertebrates built shells of intricate design, and early marine reptiles began to appear. Some long-bodied and paddle-limbed, cut through the water with ease. Others prowled the coasts, hunting fish and squid. Marine life recovered quickly compared to land. Perhaps the openness of the oceans offered more room to adapt, or perhaps the currents of Pangaea spread nutrients widely, feeding new webs of abundance. Whatever the reason, by the Triassic seas were alive again, shimmering with diversity. On land and sea alike, Pangaea was no longer silent. It breathed, it buzzed, it roared. Still, the memory of extinction lingered. Life remained vulnerable to swings in climate, to the threat of another volcanic outburst, to the shifts of continents underfoot. Survival was never guaranteed, but in that tension lay creativity. Evolution worked fastest under pressure, pushing creatures into new shapes, new strategies, new ways of being. From deserts to forests, from rivers to seas, creatures were experimenting. Some designs would endure for hundreds of millions of years. Others would vanish quickly, forgotten except for their fossils. All of them, however, play their part in rebuilding the world. By the late Triassic, dinosaurs had established themselves as more than curiosities. They were still not the largest creatures. Giant amphibians and other reptiles often outmassed them. But their endurance and adaptability gave them an edge. Within a few million years, as conditions shifted again, they would take the lead. Pangaea had become their training ground, their rehearsal hall. On this single boundless land, they learned to endure deserts, to navigate monsoons, to follow rivers, to spread across thousands of kilometers. When the supercontinent finally began to break apart, they were ready. So pause here and listen. The forests hum, the deserts whisper. The seas crash against Pangaea's edges, and moving quietly among them are creatures rehearsing the greatest performance Earth would ever see. Dinosaurs still modest, honing their endurance. Synapsids small and stubborn, carrying the spark of mammals. Insects buzzing back into abundance. Plants greening the land once more. This was not just survival. It was a preview of dominance, of future empires of life. And all of it unfolded on one world, vast and unified, beneath a single endless sky. Step away now from the green corridors of Pangaea's forests and rivers. Walk farther inland past the fertile floodplains until the air grows dry and the soil cracks beneath your feet. Here lies the true heart of the supercontinent, a desert so vast it stretches farther than the eye can imagine. In our world today, we know great deserts, the Sahara, the Gobi, the Kalahari, but none of them match the scale of Pangaea's interior. This was not simply sand in scattered patches. It was a continent-wide expanse of dryness, a zone so far removed from the sea that rains rarely reached it. The result was a desert plain stretching thousands of kilometers, an emptiness without modern comparison. The sun here blazed relentlessly, and the ground reflected its heat back upward in shimmering waves. The horizon seemed always distant, always just beyond reach. To stand here was to feel small, as though the land itself had swallowed every edge and left only endless space. And yet, even this emptiness shaped life. Dust storms, rising without warning, carried fine particles high into the sky. The air turned red with iron-rich sands, and winds swept these minerals outward. They drifted into forests at the edges of the desert, settling on leaves and soils. They crossed rivers, feeding floodplains. They even reached the seas, where they fueled blooms of plankton that fed marine life. In this way, the desert was not only barren, but also generous. It gave without intention, spreading its minerals far beyond its borders. Life elsewhere thrived on what the desert provided, even as little survived within its own bounds. There's a kind of quiet irony in this. A place so lifeless, helping sustain life across an entire planet. Still, some creatures managed to endure even here. Small reptiles scurried across the sands, their bodies low to the ground, minimizing exposure to heat. Many burrowed underground, retreating to cooler layers of soil. Some may have spent the hottest hours motionless, conserving every drop of energy. Their physiology spoke of resilience. Scales that locked in moisture, lungs efficient in dry air, limbs built for digging as much as for walking. These were survivors sculpted by scarcity, living on the very edge of possibility. Insects, too, found a way. Hardy, heat-resistant species burrowed into soil and wood, their colonies tucked safely away from the surface. They moved at night, avoiding the sun, feeding on scraps of vegetation or one another. Their buzzing was rare, but it was still present, a reminder that even in emptiness, life whispers. Water was the true prize. Rivers that cut into the desert were lifelines, though most were short-lived. They flowed briefly after seasonal rains at the fringes, then vanished, swallowed by sand or evaporated by heat. Where they lingered even for weeks, they created green oases. Plants sprouted quickly, animals gathered, and predators waited. These temporary oases left behind records in stone, ancient riverbeds, dry now for hundreds of millions of years. Geologists traced their paths, reading the sediments for clues. In the cracked mud of those vanished rivers, paleontologists find footprints, the tracks of reptiles, amphibians, even insects, all drawn to the fleeting promise of water. Imagine standing at one of these oases. Around you, green plants push up through damp soil. Insects swarm. Amphibians croak. Reptiles drink cautiously. And yet, beyond this small circle of abundance lies only endless red plain. It must have felt like a fragile island in a sea of sand. The deserts also shaped behavior. To cross them required endurance and strategy. Migratory animals likely followed seasonal paths, moving from one oasis to another in long, difficult journeys. Smaller creatures may have remained hidden, never venturing far from shelter. Predators learned patience, conserving energy until prey approached water. For humans, the desert is often a metaphor for trial and perseverance. For the creatures of Pangaea, it was reality. They did not imagine resilience. They lived it daily. Their very existence balanced on the knife edge of scarcity. The climate of the desert carried its own influence outward. Winds rising from the heated interior met cooler air at the coasts, shaping weather systems across Pangaea. Monsoons, so vital to coastal forests, were in part driven by the heat of this barren core. Dust storms shifted rainfall patterns far beyond the desert's borders. Even in absence, the desert commanded presence. To think of it another way, the desert was the silent heart of the supercontinent, pumping not blood, but wind, dust, and influence into every corner of Pangaea. From a distance, perhaps from the edge of a coastal forest, one might have looked inland and seen only shimmering haze. The desert seemed endless, its borders undefined. To walk into it was to risk being swallowed by silence. And yet, geologists today read its signature clearly. Red beds, layers of iron-stained rock, mark ancient desert soils spread across continents now divided by oceans. These rocks whisper of an interior once vast and dry, unified under a single sky. It is tempting to think of deserts as empty spaces, but in truth, they are places of quiet work. They test the limits of survival. They shape winds and weather. They feed distant ecosystems with their dust. They leave behind rocks that carry memory across hundreds of millions of years. Pangaea's deserts may have seemed lifeless, but they were anything but irrelevant. They were the backbone of the supercontinent's climate, the stern teacher of endurance, the hidden hand that linked forests, rivers, and seas. Pause for a moment here, in the middle of this vast emptiness. Around you, the ground stretches outward in every direction. The horizon is distant, the air dry, the silence broken only by the faint hiss of wind. Yet beneath your feet lies a story. Layers of red stone, footprints pressed in ancient mud, minerals carried outward by storms. Even here, in this place of absence, the earth was shaping the abundance elsewhere. Life in Pangaea was not evenly distributed. It was patchwork, stitched together by rivers, forests, deserts, and seas. Each piece carried its own rules, its own challenges. Together, they formed one world, unified not by uniformity but by connection. The deserts remind us of that connection. Their dust fed forests. Their winds shaped storms. Their silence created the contrasts that made coastal abundance feel so rich. So as you close your eyes and imagine the heart of Pangaea, do not picture only lifeless sand. Picture resilience in small reptiles burrowing into soil. Picture patience in predators waiting by oases. Picture generosity in dust carried across continents to feed distant seas. The desert was not absence. It was influence. Step now away from the silence of Pangaea's deserts and walk toward the sound of waves. At first, The land seems endless still, flat plains, sparse forests, winding rivers. But eventually, the air grows heavier with moisture. The faint taste of salt clings to the wind, and the distant roar of surf reaches your ears. You have arrived at Pangaea's edge, where land meets ocean. Here the landscape changes. Forests thicken, their roots gripping soil enriched by river sediments. Mist rolls in from the sea, clinging to conifer needles and ferns. The cries of coastal creatures echo across tidal flats, mixing with the steady rhythm of waves breaking on shore. This was the boundary of two worlds, the vast supercontinent on one side, the even greater ocean of Pangaea on the other. If Pangaea was the body of Earth, Pangaea was its breath, an ocean so immense it covered nearly 70% of the planet, swirling in uninterrupted gyres around the globe. Within this ocean, life had never truly disappeared, even during the Great Dying. It had suffered, yes, but it endured. And now, as Pangaea's land rebounded, so too did its seas. Tiny plankton filled the sunlit waters near the coasts, drifting in immense numbers. They were too small to see individually, yet together they formed the foundation of marine ecosystems. Fish fed on them, invertebrates filtered them, and even larger predators relied on the food webs they supported. In this way, the smallest creatures carried the largest responsibility. Closer to shore, shallows teemed with diversity. Schools of fish flickered in the light, their scales catching sunbeams that pierced the surface. Shellfish clung to rocks, their ornate patterns silently filtering water. Trilobites, once rulers of ancient seas, were gone by now, but their absence had opened space for new designs to flourish. One of the most remarkable developments of the Triassic seas was the rise of marine reptiles. Some evolved into long-bodied swimmers, their limbs reshaped into flippers. They cut through the water with serpentine grace, hunting fish and squid. Others grew bulkier, their jaws broad and powerful, snapping at anything that crossed their path. These were not dinosaurs, though they lived alongside them. They were a different branch of reptiles, ones that had taken to the water with startling success. Imagine standing on a Triassic shoreline and seeing a creature glide past, its body sleek, its eyes unblinking, its movements effortless in the surf. To land dwellers, it must have seemed like an alien from another world. The seas have always been places of reinvention, and in Pangaea's time, they became laboratories of new reptilian forms. To the east of the supercontinent lay the Tethys Sea, smaller than Pangaea, but equally important. Sheltered by continental shelves, its waters were calmer, shallower, and rich with nutrients. Coral-like reefs grew here, though built by ancient organisms, unlike those that form reefs today. These reefs created havens for fish, mollusks, and early marine reptiles, offering both food and protection. The Tethys was a cradle of evolution. Its stability allowed species to thrive and diversify before spreading outward into the wider oceans. In a way, it was a nursery, rocking gently at the edge of Pangaea. Marine life was not only about predators and prey, it was also about chemistry. Rivers flowing from Pangaea carried minerals into the seas, fertilizing plankton blooms. Dust from deserts carried on winds settled into the water, feeding microorganisms that in turn fueled entire ecosystems. Even volcanic eruptions played their part, releasing gases that altered ocean chemistry, sometimes to harmful extremes, other times stimulating bursts of productivity. Every current, every grain of dust, every river flow tied land and sea together. Nothing was separate. Picture a calm day on Pangaea's coast. The tide is low, exposing muddy flats dotted with shells. Small crabs scuttle sideways, leaving trails in the wet sand. Fish flick their tails in shallow pools, while seabirds, no, not yet birds, but perhaps pterosaur ancestors, circle overhead, watching. The air smells of salt and resin, carried together on the breeze. Then farther out, the calm surface breaks. A marine reptile bursts upward, jaws snapping on a fish before sliding back into the waves. Ripples spread outward, then fade, leaving the sea calm once more. It is a reminder that life here was as restless as on land, constantly moving, constantly adapting. Storms, too, played their role. Monsoons that drenched coastal forests also pounded the seas. Waves rose high, winds howled, and rain lashed the surface. For creatures of the coast, survival meant endurance. Plants clung with deep roots. Shells anchored to rock. Reptiles hid in deeper water. When the storm passed, debris littered the shore. Driftwood shells, perhaps even the bodies of creatures that had not endured. Yet storms also stirred nutrients from the deep, mixing layers of water, feeding plankton blooms that sustained life. As on land, destruction and renewal were never far apart. The chemistry of the ocean mirrored the atmosphere above it. Oxygen levels fluctuated, sometimes dropping in deeper waters. In those times, species either adapted to low oxygen conditions or abandoned the depths for the shallows. Carbon dioxide from eruptions warmed the planet, making surface waters hotter, sometimes uncomfortably so. Life had to bend with these changes or risk vanishing, but bend it did. Marine ecosystems remained resilient, adapting in ways that echoed the resilience seen on land. Fish diversified, invertebrates flourished, marine reptiles spread. From the smallest plankton to the largest predator, life continued its patient work of persistence. It is worth pausing here to notice how Pangaea's unity shaped the seas, with all land gathered into one piece. Ocean currents moved differently than they do today. Panthalassa circulated in vast, uninterrupted loops, carrying heat and nutrients across enormous distances. The Tethys Sea, enclosed and stable, provided contrast. These two systems, one global, one local, together created a dynamic balance that shaped climate and ecosystems alike. Even today, scientists trace the fingerprints of these ancient currents in rock layers, fossil distributions, and chemical signatures. The seas of Pangaea may be gone, but their memory lingers in stone. If you close your eyes, you could almost hear it. Waves breaking on shore, the hiss of foam retreating across sand, the cry of reptiles gliding overhead, the splash of fish in shallow pools. Beneath the surface, a world of silence and movement, schools darting, shells clamping, predators slicing through the blue. This was Pangaea's other half, the world of water that embraced its edges, sustaining life even as deserts and forests battled for balance inland. To live on Pangaea was to live between extremes, dry deserts at the heart, lush forest along rivers, and endless seas at the margins. Each of these environments shaped life in its own way, and together, they created a planet where survival meant adaptability, persistence, and constant adjustment. The coasts and seas remind us of that adaptability. Here, creatures reinvented themselves. Here, life found ways to thrive where currents shifted, where storms raged, where chemistry changed. It is a lesson repeated through Earth's history. The sea is never still, but it is always generous to those who can move with its restlessness. Step back onto the land of Pangaea, leaving the salt air of its coast behind. The forests stretch ahead once more, tall conifers reaching skyward, cycads rising like ancient sentinels, and ferns spreading low across the damp soil. Insects buzz in the air, amphibians croak in the mud, and reptiles move cautiously through shafts of sunlight. Yet the balance of power here is beginning to shift. This is the late Triassic, around 230 million years ago, a turning point in Earth's history. For millions of years, reptiles and synapsids had shared the land uneasily, each carving out their roles. But now, in the long shadow of extinction and recovery, new designs are emerging, designs that will change everything. Among them are the first true dinosaurs. They are not yet giants, not yet the towering creatures of the Jurassic, but their posture and movement already set them apart. Their legs are tucked beneath their bodies rather than splayed outward like most reptiles. This gives them speed, balance, and endurance. They can run farther, chase longer, travel across wider landscapes without tiring. Some are small carnivores, light and agile, with sharp teeth and claws. Imagine one no taller than your waist, darting between ferns, eyes fixed on an unsuspecting lizard. Its movements are quick, economical, precise. When strikes, it does so with confidence born of design. Others are early herbivores, leaner than the bulky plant eaters to come, but already adapted for grazing. They move in small groups, lowering their heads to nibble cycads and seed ferns, then raising them quickly to scan for danger. Their tails, stiff and balanced, sway as they walk, stabilizing each step. They are not yet rulers, but their potential is clear. Meanwhile, the synapsids, once the dominant force on land, are shrinking back into quieter roles. Where once massive sailback predators like Dimetrodon stalked floodplains, now only smaller, subtler forms remain. Some dig burrows, emerging only at night. Others adapt to niches ignored by reptiles, surviving on insects or roots. Their bodies carry signs of the future. Higher metabolisms, perhaps even warm blood. Their limbs are sturdier, their movements more efficient. Some may have even developed the first traces of fur to regulate heat. These details remain hidden in the fossil record, but the trajectory is clear. Though diminished, synapsids are not gone. They are waiting in the wings, holding on to traits that will one day define mammals. Pangaea itself plays a role in this transition. Its immense deserts, unpredictable monsoons, and volcanic upheavals create constant stress. Dinosaurs, with their efficient lungs and strong legs, are built for endurance in such extremes. They can cover long distances between water sources. They can chase prey or flee predators across open plains. Their physiology is tuned to the restless nature of the supercontinent. Synapsids, smaller now, retreat into safer strategies. They hide, they burrow, they conserve. It is a kind of division of labor. Dinosaurs claim the open spaces, the daylight, the sweeping plains. Synapsids cling to the shadows, the night, the hidden places of Pangaea. Both strategies work. Both ensure survival. But one path leads to dominance. Picture a Triassic floodplain at dusk. The air is warm, heavy with the scent of resin and wet soil. In the distance, a herd of small plant-eating dinosaurs grazes quietly. Their movements are cautious, but confident. Predators circle unseen, waiting for a mistake. Nearby, a synapsid scurries from its burrow, emerging only in twilight. It nibbles on insects in the leaf litter, listening constantly for the sound of footsteps above. It is small, humble, almost invisible in comparison to the taller reptiles that surround it. Yet it, too, plays its part. It survives, it persists, it carries the spark of traits that will matter millions of years later. Two futures share the same ground, never fully aware of what they are building. Dinosaurs did not dominate overnight. They grew into their role slowly, spreading first along river valleys and plains, then into forests and uplands. At first, they competed with other reptiles, large crocodile-like archosaurs that ruled much of the Triassic. But as climates shifted, as extinctions trimmed the competition, dinosaurs began to expand. Their endurance allowed them to exploit environments that others could not. Their posture gave them speed in open country. Their lungs carried them farther in thin, hot air. Each advantage built upon the last until the balance tipped. By the end of the Triassic, dinosaurs were no longer just one of many. They were becoming the defining creatures of the land. It is worth noting the quiet humor of this transition. The synapsids, our own distant ancestors, had once been the dominant players, sailback predators, bulky plant eaters, rulers of Permian floodplains. And now, they were reduced to small insect eaters, creatures that might scurry unnoticed beneath a fern. Meanwhile, reptiles, once the quieter background characters, were stepping into the spotlight, preparing to grow into giants. It is as if evolution reshuffled the script, giving the leading role to new actors and asking the old stars to perform in supporting roles until their time came again. The forests of Pangaea bore witness to this shift. Their conifers and cycads fed the growing herds of plant-eating dinosaurs. Their shade sheltered the small synapsids and reptiles that lived in secrecy. Their trunks bore the marks of insects. Their fallen leaves fed the soil. Each layer of forest life contributed to the drama above. Along rivers, footprints tell the story even more clearly. Trackways preserved in mud reveal small herds of dinosaurs moving together, side by side. Other tracks show predators chasing prey, their strides long and powerful. Still others reveal the faint impressions of smaller animals. Synapsids scurrying at night, insects leaving delicate patterns in the soil. Every footprint is a sentence in the diary of Pangaea, written in stone. And still, the earth itself never rested. Volcanoes rumbled, shaking forests and blackening skies. Ash fell like snow, cooling the land for weeks or months before warming resumed. Rivers swelled and shrank with unpredictable rains. Deserts spread their dust far and wide. Through all this, dinosaurs expanded, synapsids endured, and ecosystems adjusted. It is a reminder that life has never been separate from geology. The land shapes the creatures, and the creatures shape the land in return. Pause now in this late Triassic evening. The sun has dipped low, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. A small herd of dinosaurs grazes quietly in the fading light. A predator moves in the shadows, its eyes glowing faintly. In the underbrush, a synapsid emerges, quick and cautious, gathering what it can before night falls. The air is still heavy, but alive with possibility. Insects buzz, frogs call, leaves rustle in the wind. This is the threshold of a new era. Dinosaurs are preparing to rise, to become the great rulers of the Mesozoic. Synapsids are stepping back, conserving their energy for a different destiny. Both paths begin here, side by side, on the soils of Pangaea. The Triassic evening fades into dawn, and with it, time itself moves forward. Millions of years pass in silence, until the earth stirs again with new shapes, new voices, new rulers. We are now in the Jurassic period, around 200 million years ago, when Pangaea still stood whole, but the first deep fractures had begun to whisper of its eventual parting. And in this shifting world, dinosaurs had fully claimed their throne. They no longer scurried modestly among ferns, no longer competed in the shadows of other reptiles. Now they towered above the land, their bodies immense, their presence unmissable. Herds of long-necked sauropods, giants like Brachiosaurus and Diplodocus, move slowly across floodplains, their necks reaching into treetops, their tails sweeping behind them like living bridges of muscle and bone. To watch one feed would have been to see an animal taller than any tree, pulling down branches with casual ease. Their footsteps shook the earth, pressing craters into mud that hardened into fossils we find today. Nearby, herds of smaller plant-eating dinosaurs grazed lower vegetation. Stegosaurs, with their rows of bony plates rising like sails along their backs, shuffled through cycads. Their tails bristled with spikes, quiet warnings to any predator that might get too close. And predators did come. Carnivores like Allosaurus stalked these herds, their jaws filled with serrated teeth, their limbs powerful for pursuit. They were hunters built for strength and speed, testing their luck against prey many times their size. The landscape echoed with their roars, their chases, their victories and failures. Pangaea, once a continent of experiments, was now a continent of giants. The climate of the Jurassic was different from the harsh swings of the Triassic. It was, in many regions, more stable, warmer, wetter. Forests spread thick and tall, filled with conifers, cycads, and tree ferns. Rivers carried abundance across floodplains. The deserts of Pangaea's heart still remained, vast and red, but even they were edged with pockets of life. This balance favored dinosaurs. Their endurance and adaptability allowed them to thrive in every environment, from coast to uplands, from swamps to plains. They grew larger, spread farther, diversified into dozens of forms. Synapsid, meanwhile, lingered in smaller roles. Burrowers, insect eaters, nocturnal foragers. In the shadows of giants, they survived quietly, carrying forward traits that would one day matter again. But for now, the spotlight belonged to the dinosaurs. Imagine standing in a Jurassic forest at dawn. Mist curls around conifer trunks. Ferns spread across the undergrowth, their fronds glistening with dew. A herd of sauropods moves slowly through the trees, their massive bodies shaking branches as they pass. Birds are not yet present, but small feathered dinosaur ancestors leap from branch to branch, their wings still awkward but promising. The air is filled with sound, the calls of herbivores, the distant roar of predators, the rustle of leaves as tails sweep through the canopy. It is a living orchestra, vast and steady, with dinosaurs as its loudest instruments. Yet even as life flourished, the earth beneath was restless. The tectonic plates that had assembled Pangaea were beginning to strain. Deep cracks split the land, running like scars across the supercontinent. Magma welled up from below, spilling in long fissures, hardening into new rock. These were the first signs of Pangaea's slow breakup, a process that would take tens of millions of years, but which had already begun. Volcanoes erupted along these rifts, sending ash into the skies. Lava flowed across valleys, sometimes for hundreds of kilometers. The land groaned as it stretched, and seas began to seep into low places, forming new coastlines. To stand on such a rift would have been awe-inspiring. On one side, forest and plain. On the other, a fresh scar of black rock, steam rising where magma met water. The earth was reminding its creatures that permanence is an illusion. For dinosaurs, these changes were not immediate threats. In fact, the fertile soils left behind by lava often fed lush vegetation, which in turn sustained enormous herds. Floodplains expanded along new coastlines. Ecosystems shifted, but life continued to thrive. Still, the cracks carried a message. Pangaea would not last forever. Its unity was temporary. Already, the seeds of separation had been sown. The seas around Pangaea told a similar story. Pangaea still dominated the globe, but the Tethys Sea grew increasingly important as rifts opened along the supercontinent. It sheltered waters, nurtured diverse marine life. Fish swam in dazzling schools. Invertebrates built reefs of strange designs, and marine reptiles continued their reign, some growing into immense hunters of the deep. On warm days along the shore, one might have seen long-necked plesiosaurs rising to breathe, their paddle-like limbs stirring the water. Farther out, ichthyosaurs shaped like sleek dolphins sliced through waves in pursuit of fish. The oceans mirrored the land, dominated by giants, filled with restless motion. The air above Pangaea, too, was becoming livelier. Early pterosaurs took to the skies, their wings stretched from elongated fingers, their bodies light and agile. Some skimmed across the surface of rivers, catching fish in their beaks. Others soared high above forests, scanning for carrion or small prey. Their silhouettes, strange but graceful, marked the beginning of a new dimension of life. It is worth pausing to smile at this. For hundreds of millions of years, life had been confined to water and land. Now finally, it was experimenting with the sky. If dinosaurs were the rulers of earthbound realms, pterosaurs were the scouts of the heavens. The Jurassic world of Pangaea was not simply about scale, it was about balance. Giants fed on vast forests. Predators kept herds in check. Smaller creatures filled countless niches. Rivers tied ecosystems together. Deserts continued their silent work of feeding distant lands, and seas brimmed with marine abundance. It was, in many ways, Earth's first great golden age of dinosaurs. But beneath this balance, the Earth continued to shift. The rifts widened. Volcanoes roared. New seas seeped into cracks. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Pangaea began to break apart. One day, millions of years later, the continents would drift into the shapes we recognize, separate, familiar, divided by oceans. But for now, Pangaea still held, vast and whole, even as its foundation strained. Pause here on a Jurassic morning. The sun rises over endless plains. Sauropods stretch their necks to feed on treetops. Stegosaurs shuffle through cycads. Allosaurs prowl, their eyes sharp. Pterosaurs circle overhead, wings glinting in the light. In the distance, a volcano smokes faintly, its plume curling into the sky, a reminder of change yet to come. This was Pangaea in its glory, unified, abundant, restless. A land of giants and beginnings, a land of cracks and endings, all unfolding under one boundless sky. The ground beneath Pangaea was never still. For millions of years, its plates pressed against each other, forming mountains, lifting ridges, and leaving behind deep scars. But by the Jurassic, those same forces had begun to pull in the opposite direction. The supercontinent that had once gathered Earth's land into one colossal embrace was starting to tear itself apart. At first, the signs are subtle. A long crack splitting through rock, a valley sinking where the crust stretched thin. But with time, magma surged upward through these wounds, filling them with molten rock that hardened into dark basalt. Fissures opened wide and fiery, releasing plumes of gas into the sky. These cracks grew into rifts, and the rifts became the first outlines of new oceans. Pangaea's unity was ending slowly, but inevitably. To live in this time was to witness both grandeur and unease. Imagine walking across a plain where forests grew thick with cycads and conifers, and suddenly the ground ahead fell away into a rift, kilometers wide, steaming with volcanic heat. The land that split where once it was whole, and rivers that once flowed smoothly now plunged into valleys of stone and fire. The earth was remapping itself beneath the feet of dinosaurs. This process did more than redraw coastlines. It reshaped climate itself. As the land split, new seas began to form, allowing moisture to reach places that had once been parched. Regions that had been desert grew greener. Other areas, once humid, grew drier as winds shifted. The careful balance of Pangaea's climate was unraveling. Dinosaurs, however, thrived in this shifting landscape. Herds of sauropods migrated along river valleys that had widened into fertile basins. Plant eaters spread into new forests, while predators followed close behind. Smaller dinosaurs adapted quickly, their nimble forms giving them access to new niches. Synapsids, the small mammal-like creatures, found opportunities too. In the cracks of Pangaea, in the forests that flourished along new coastlines, they carved out quiet lives. Some took to burrowing, some climbed trees, some hunted insects in the night. They were rarely the stars of the show, but they endured, their persistence carrying forward the mammalian blueprint. The deserts at Pangaea's core still remained, vast and red, but even they began to change. Dust storms carried farther, riding new wind patterns. Oases shifted with rivers redirected by tectonic upheaval. And eventually, as the supercontinent cracked more deeply, the deserts themselves began to shrink. Imagine standing in such a desert, the horizon endless as always, but then noticing a distant shimmer not of heat, but of water. A shallow sea beginning to intrude where once only dryness reigned. For the creatures that had mastered arid survival, this was both loss and opportunity. Some vanished with their desert homes. Others adapted again, finding ways to live at the edges of new coasts. Along these fresh coastlines, ecosystems bloomed. Rivers poured into the seas, feeding plankton blooms that spread across shallow waters. Coral-like structures rose, forming habitats for countless fish and invertebrates. Marine reptiles expanded once more, their long bodies slicing through waves, their jaws snapping shut on shoals of fish. The Tethys Sea, in particular, became a center of abundance. Sheltered by land, its calm waters nurtured diversity. Species that thrived here later spread outward into the broader oceans, shaping marine life for millions of years to come. And beyond the Tethys, the vast Panthalassa still stretched around the globe, its currents adjusting to the rearranging continents. The ocean was no longer uninterrupted, no longer a single endless expanse. New coastlines carved new currents, and with them came new climates. The skies, too, were changing. Pterosaurs had grown bolder, more varied. Some skimmed the surface of rivers for fish, their wings casting shadows on the water. Others soared high on coastal winds, their long beaks and crests making them unmistakable silhouettes against the horizon. For the first time, Earth's skies were busy. The mastery of air was not yet complete. True birds had not yet taken wing, but the experiments were underway. Feathers, once simple insulation for small dinosaurs and synapsids, had begun to take on new shapes. Some creatures fluttered awkwardly from branch to branch, while others glided short distances. Evolution was quietly sketching the blueprints of flight. Through all this, volcanoes remained a constant reminder of the Earth's restlessness. Along the rifts, lava flowed for hundreds of kilometers, blanketing landscapes in black stone. Ash clouds rose into the air, cooling the land temporarily before greenhouse gases warmed it again. These eruptions released vast amounts of carbon dioxide, fueling powerful weather systems that swept across both land and sea. For dinosaurs, these shifts were challenges, but not barriers. Their endurance, their adaptability, carried them through storms and droughts alike. For smaller synapsids, the upheavals created spaces to hide, to persist quietly. Where giants battled extremes, the small simply endured them. It is a lesson repeated often in Earth's history. Survival does not always belong to the loudest or the largest, but to those who bend without breaking. Imagine now standing at the edge of a rift, where Pangaea is tearing itself open. The air smells of sulfur and smoke. The ground trembles faintly beneath your feet. Before you stretches a valley of black rock, fresh and steaming, a scar where the earth is split. To one side, forests still stand, filled with the calls of dinosaurs. To the other, new coastlines shimmer, waves licking at young shores. It is as though you are watching the planet sketch its own future in real time. The breakup of Pangaea was not sudden. It unfolded over tens of millions of years, slow enough that no creature alive then could sense the full story. But its consequences were immense. New oceans divided ecosystems. Mountains rose where plates collided. Winds shifted, carrying rains to some places and drought to others. Pangaea's unity had given life the chance to spread across one continuous land. Its breakup would now create separation, isolation, and diversity. Evolution thrives on such division. Creatures cut off from one another change in different directions, becoming new species, new forms, new experiments. In this sense, the tearing of Pangaea was not an ending, but another beginning. Pause here and breathe. The forests are alive with giants. The skies carry gliders and pterosaurs. The seas shimmer with new life. Beneath it all, the ground shifts and cracks, slowly dismantling the unity that once defined the world. The age of Pangaea was fading, but its influence was far from over. Its deserts had fed the seas. Its forests had sculpted the air. Its creatures had rehearsed resilience. And now, its very breakup was setting the stage for an explosion of diversity that would define the rest of the Mesozoic. By the Middle Jurassic, the cracks in Pangaea had stretched wide enough that entire seas were flooding in. Where once land had stretched unbroken for thousands of kilometers, now salt water rolled in, carving coastlines and splitting ecosystems. The Earth was no longer a single supercontinent, but a patchwork beginning to form. Laurasia in the north, Gondwana in the south. The split was slow, imperceptible in a single lifetime. But over millions of years, the world redrew itself. Continents that had once fit together like pieces of a puzzle drifted apart. If you had stood at one coastline long enough, you would have seen the horizon change. At first, a trickle of seawater through a valley, later an inlet, then a full ocean. The process was so gradual that no creature realized they were watching the birth of geography, as we know it. Yet the consequences would ripple through every forest, every sea, every breath of air. As the land divided, climates grew more diverse. The interior deserts of Pangaea shrank, as new coastlines brought rainfall further inland. Regions that had once been dry-baked under endless sun now sprouted forests thick with ferns, cycads, and conifers. Elsewhere, where mountains rose along colliding plates, rain shadows formed, creating new arid belts. It was a world of contrasts. Lush wetlands on one side of a range, dry scrubland on the other. Rivers carved new paths, carrying life with them. Animals that had once mingled freely across one giant landmass now found themselves separated by seas, mountains, or deserts. For evolution, this was opportunity. Isolation allowed populations to drift in their own directions. What had once been one species became two. then many, over time. This separation produced the dazzling diversity of the Mesozoic world. Dinosaurs, already dominant, spread into every new niche. In the north, along the edges of Laurasia, smaller carnivores adapted to forests and wetlands, growing sleek and agile. In Gondwana, immense sauropods roamed across fertile plains, their long necks reaching the tops of conifer trees that grew thickly in the southern heat. Some dinosaurs developed extravagant crests and frills, not for survival but for display, signaling to mates or intimidating rivals. In this new age of diversity, beauty became as much a force as survival. It is humbling to think that as continents drifted, natural selection was quietly shaping not just strength and size, but elegance and spectacle. And yet alongside these giants, the small synapsids, the early mammals, continued their quiet story. They dug burrows, hid in underbrush, and crept through the night. Most were no larger than a rat, but their ability to adapt made them survivors. Where dinosaurs dominated the day, mammals claimed the shadows, a subtle balance that would last for tens of millions of years. The seas mirrored the changes on land. The Tethys Sea, widening between Laurasia and Gondwana, became a cradle of marine life. Warm, shallow waters teemed with ammonites, fish, and coral-like reefs. Marine reptiles grew larger and more specialized. Ichthyosaurs, streamlined like dolphins, coursed through open waters, while pliosaurs, massive jawed predators, ruled the depths with terrifying authority. Farther out in the vast Panthalassa, the largest ocean in Earth's history, currents shifted with the changing continents. Entire climates depended on these flows of water. Winds followed them, carrying rains to some regions and leaving others in drought. A planet once dominated by uniform extremes was becoming one of regional variety. It is strange to think that these small shifts, currents turning, winds bending, could decide which forests flourished, which deserts expanded, which animals endured. Yet, that has always been Earth's story. Survival written in the invisible movements of air and water. The skies grew busy too. Pterosaurs diversified into countless forms. Some the size of sparrows, darting through forests, others spanning wings wider than a small plane, gliding along coastlines in search of fish. Their shapes grew more refined, their adaptations more daring. And on the branches of trees, feathers whispered of what was coming. What had begun as simple insulation evolved into structures for display and eventually for flight. Tiny, bird-like dinosaurs flapped awkwardly from trunk to trunk, testing the possibilities of air. The dream of flight was spreading, carried on fragile wings that would one day conquer the skies. If you could walk across Laurasia during this time, you might find yourself wandering through a dense forest alive with calls. Ferns brushed against your legs, while above, the canopy filtered sunlight into shifting patches. The air was humid, filled with the trill of insects and the distant roar of predators. Travel south to Gondwana, and the scene would change. The land opened into vast floodplains, where herds of long-necked sauropods grazed like living towers. Their necks swayed above the treetops, while smaller dinosaurs darted between their legs, scavenging fallen leaves and fruits. Predators prowled at the edges, their eyes sharp, their movements patient. From forest to floodplain, from swamp to desert, the earth was no longer one land, but many, and life had adapted to every corner. The earth itself seemed restless, as though unable to sit still. Volcanoes lined the rift zones, pouring out basalt that hardened into new crust. Ash rained down, smothering valleys before life returned again. The atmosphere thickened with carbon dioxide, warming the world even as eruptions briefly cooled it with ash. Climate swung like a pendulum, humid, then dry, warm, then cooler. Yet always life adapted. Dinosaurs evolved to suit the heat, to endure the droughts, to chase opportunity wherever it arose. The mammals endured by shrinking into shadows. The reptiles of the seas followed the shifting coastlines. Everything bent, nothing broke. There is a certain irony here. The same forces tearing Pangaea apart were also fueling abundance. The breakup created new habitats, new climates, new opportunities. The Earth was in turmoil, yet this turmoil was precisely what allowed life to flourish. Had Pangaea remained whole, perhaps diversity would have stagnated, confined by uniformity. But as it fractured, as pieces drifted like rafts across the globe, nature responded with creativity. Isolation bred innovation. Out of separation came variety. It is a quiet reminder. Sometimes what feels like breaking apart is really the beginning of something new. Imagine now standing on a young coastline, waves washing against black volcanic stone. The air is warm, rich with the smell of salt and resin from nearby forests. Above you, pterosaurs wheel, their wings catching the wind. Behind you, the land is alive with calls, the trumpeting of sauropods, the sharp cries of smaller hunters. Before you, the sea stretches vast and glittering, filled with reptiles and fish. This is a world in motion. Continents drifting, oceans widening, forests expanding, deserts shrinking. Every horizon speaks of change. And though none of its creatures could know it, this drifting of continents was shaping not just their world, but ours. For as Laurasia and Gondwana grew apart, they set in motion the outlines of the continents we walk on today. By the late Jurassic, the fracture lines that had begun quietly were now undeniable. The Earth's single giant body was no more. The seams of Pangaea had pulled wide. Laurasia drifted northward, stretching across what would one day be North America, Europe, and Asia. Gondwana held together in the south, massive and heavy. But even it bore cracks that hinted at future separations. The Atlantic Ocean was in its infancy. It was not yet the broad expanse we know today, but a slim, lengthening ribbon of salt water cutting between continents. If you could stand on a rocky coast of early North America and gaze across, you would not yet see the Europe we know, but you would sense the distance beginning. Each tide whispered of change, each wave carving edges into the land, each horizon marking a world slowly, steadily dividing. The climate shifted as continents rearranged. North America, once part of a dry continental interior, grew wetter along its coasts, feeding lush conifer forests where giant ferns and horsetails thrived beneath towering trees. Inland, wide floodplains spread, nourished by rivers that meandered and shifted with the new topography. Europe, fragmented into islands by shallow seas, was a land of patchwork ecosystems. In one valley, wetlands teemed with life. A few miles away, sandy shores stretched into lagoons. Asia, still welded to Europe, was vast, heavy with forests and mountain ranges rising along fault lines. In Gondwana, great stretches of land baked under tropical sun, while farther south, cooler climates spread near the poles. Australia, Antarctica, South America, Africa, and India were still fused, sharing creatures and climates. Yet the rifts forming within them promised that even this southern supercontinent would not remain whole for long. It is striking to consider how geography shaped opportunity. The creatures of Laurasia and Gondwana, though born from the same ancestral stock, began diverging, each continent becoming its own laboratory of evolution. Dinosaurs flourished in these varied environments. In North America, the Allosaurus, a predator with sharp teeth and strong hind limbs, stalked the floodplains. Its reign as a top hunter was secured not just by strength, but by cooperation. Fossil evidence hints they may have hunted in groups, a sobering thought for any sauropod grazing nearby. Alongside them walked Diplodocus and Apatosaurus, giants whose necks swept in slow arcs across conifer forests. Their sheer size was both their shield and their burden. To watch a herd moving together must have been like seeing a slow, living river of flesh and bone. Europe's fragmented islands produced smaller, more specialized dinosaurs. Some adapted to limited resources by shrinking in size, a phenomenon known today as island dwarfism. Where space was scarce, giants could not survive, but nimble, compact creatures thrived. In Gondwana, life stretched toward the colossal, the Brachiosaurus, towering with forelimbs longer than its hind legs, reached higher into trees than any other dinosaur. Alongside it lived predators that grew to match its scale. For nature, size tends to follow size. Meanwhile, in the seas, the changes of drifting continents transformed currents and coastlines. The shallow waters of the young Atlantic became nurseries for marine reptiles. Ichthyosaurs, shaped like swordfish with wide eyes, adapted to deep diving, coursed through the waters. Pliosaurs, with jaws that could crush a crocodile in two, dominated coastal hunting grounds. Ammonites, spiraled mollusks related to squid, continued to flourish, their shells ranging from thumbnail size to larger than a steering wheel. They floated and darted in schools, their shells shimmering in the shallows like floating ornaments. For paleontologists today, ammonites are markers of time, their rapid evolution serving as a geological calendar etched in stone. The skies grew richer with variety. Pterosaurs expanded into niches of every kind. Small insect-eating forms flitted like oversized bats through forests. Larger ones soared across coastlines, some with crests that looked more like flags than flight tools. These crests may have been used for balance, species recognition, or perhaps just display. Nature sometimes enjoys decoration for its own sake. And among the forests of Laurasia, something delicate was taking shape. The first true bird, like Archaeopteryx, appeared, their wings feathered, their tails still reptilian, their claws betraying their dinosaur origins. They were not elegant flyers at first, more like gliders or awkward flappers, but they represented a quiet revolution. For the first time, vertebrates had taken to the skies not just with leathery wings, but with feathers. The air, once filled only with the cries of pterosaurs, now carried the faint beat of wings that would one day give rise to songbirds, eagles, and pigeons. As continents separated, life became increasingly distinct. This process, known as vicariance, meant that species once united across Pangaea now evolved in isolation. A creature in South America might share an ancestor with one in Africa, but after millions of years apart, they became strangers. This is why today continents hold such unique creatures. Kangaroos in Australia, elephants in Africa, armadillos in South America. All owe their separations to these ancient drifts. What began with the splitting of Pangaea set the stage for the patterns of life we see across the globe. One might say Earth was inventing accents, regional flavors of life, each continent speaking its own dialect of evolution. The Earth itself was restless, still venting heat from within. Rifting continents gave rise to volcanic chains, where magma spilled into the seas and hardened into new crust. These mid-ocean ridges acted like conveyor belts, pushing continents farther apart. Sometimes the Earth's temper was more dramatic. Massive eruptions spewed ash into the skies, darkening sunlight and cooling regions temporarily. Yet over the long run, the carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere warmed the globe, sustaining greenhouse conditions. It was a warm world, humid in many places, lush with vegetation. Even the poles, though cooler, were far from the icy wastelands we imagine today. Forests extended toward high latitudes, and life followed. If you were to walk through North America at this time, you would have heard the ground shake beneath herds of sauropods. The air filled with the trumpeting of these giants. Predators like Allosaurus moved silently in their shadows, waiting for weakness. Traveling east to Europe, you would step onto islands where smaller dinosaurs darted through forests, their call sharper, their scale smaller, their ecosystems more delicate. And in the south, across Gondwana, the landscape stretched vast and dramatic. Endless plains dotted with conifer groves, rivers winding like silver ribbons, and sauropods that rose above the horizon like moving towers. Everywhere, life had adjusted to new coastlines, new climates, new opportunities. What makes this period remarkable is how it bridges the ancient and the familiar. In one sense, it was an alien world. Giants walking forests, seas filled with reptilian predators, birds just beginning to flutter awkwardly. Yet in another sense, it was the world we know being born, the Atlantic widening, continents drifting toward their modern places, ecosystems fragmenting into the roots of those we recognize today. The familiar outlines of the map we know, North America, South America, Africa, Eurasia, were all beginning to emerge, though still rough, still scattered, like sketches waiting for detail. Earth was carving itself into the planet we would inherit. And yet, the story was far from complete. Gondwana, still clinging together, would in time tear itself into new pieces. Laurasia, too, would change, growing mountains and seas. The Earth's restlessness was not finished. The ground beneath the dinosaurs' feet, though steady in their eyes, was always shifting, always shaping the future. It is humbling to think, when we look at a world map today, what we see is not permanent. It is only the current draft of a story that began with Pangaea, a story that continues even now as continents drift by centimeters each year. By the early Cretaceous, the southern giant, Gondwana, was no longer a unified mass of land. Cracks widened into seas, and what had once been one colossal continent began unraveling into fragments. Africa drifted away from South America. India, once tucked securely against Madagascar, began its long voyage northward, destined to collide with Asia millions of years later and give rise to the Himalayas. Australia and Antarctica remained fused for now, a southern pair still clasped together near the pole. Yet even they bore fault lines that hinted at eventual separation. The Earth, restless as ever, was drafting new blueprints. The South Atlantic Ocean opened, stretching steadily wider. Its waters, once a narrow seam, now lapped against coastlines that had never before felt the pull of tides. Africa's western shore faced new horizons. South America's eastern edge, a mirror once pressed against it, now gazed across open water. The echo of this separation remains visible today, in the way the jagged bulge of Brazil still seems to fit into the curve of West Africa, like puzzle pieces once joined. With every kilometer of drift, ecosystems grew more distinct. South America became its own cradle of evolution, isolated, free to experiment. Africa, set apart, developed its own caste of creatures. India, racing northward like a runaway raft, carried its passengers of life into strange latitudes, where climates would shift beneath them. Such isolation is a sculptor of diversity. When continents separate, their inhabitants no longer exchange genes, no longer share predators or prey. Instead, they wander down divergent paths, shaped by new climates and landscapes. Over time, cousins become strangers, and strangers become entirely new species. In Africa, the land grew hotter, its climates ranging from tropical coasts to arid deserts. Here roamed the mighty Spinosaurus, a predator unlike any other, with a long crocodile-like snout, conical teeth for catching fish, and a sail-like spine rising high above its back. It was as though nature, having drawn so many variations of theropods, decided to sketch something experimental. Part crocodile, part dinosaur, part dragon, Spinosaurus stalked river deltas and estuaries, a fisherman among giants. Sharing the land were carcharodontosaurs, predators with shark-like teeth designed for tearing flesh, and sauropods like Paralitodon, whose size challenged even the brachiosaurs of earlier ages. In Africa, size and strangeness went hand in hand, the land rewarding bold evolutionary gambles. South America, meanwhile, nurtured its own titans. Here lived the Argentinosaurus, one of the largest creatures ever to walk the earth. Its massive frame stretched over 30 meters, its weight rivaling that of dozens of elephants. To see one would have been to witness a mountain in motion, each step slow but steady, its neck sweeping trees into reach like a crane built of living bone. Predators adapted accordingly. The Giganotosaurus, rivaling even Tyrannosaurus in size, stalked these giants. With skulls nearly as long as a human is tall, they were apex hunters in ecosystems where prey grew to staggering proportions. South America, cut off, specialized in gigantism. Perhaps the land's vast plains encouraged size as both protection and advantage. In such a world, being small was not easy. Farther east, India was drifting northward, carrying with it a cargo of strange and varied life. Its creatures, once part of Gondwana's common stock, would soon find themselves isolated not just by water, but by latitude. As India moved toward equatorial regions, its climate shifted, and its flora and fauna shifted with it. This drifting subcontinent was like a time capsule, holding species that would one day collide with Asia's ecosystems, unleashing a mingling of lineages. But for millions of years, India was alone, an island continent adrift in the ancient seas. At the southern edge of the world, Australia and Antarctica remained connected, though conditions at their latitudes were unlike anything farther north. Antarctica, positioned near the South Pole, endured long winters of twilight and cool summers, where the sun lingered endlessly above the horizon. Yet in this age, the world was still in a greenhouse climate. The poles, though cooler, were not buried in ice. Instead, they were forested, their groves of conifers and ferns supporting ecosystems adapted to seasonal light rather than extreme cold. Australia, tethered to Antarctica, shared these forests. Small dinosaurs with insulating feathers scurried beneath the trees, their bodies adapted to withstand the long polar nights. These are not the towering sauropods or massive predators of the tropics, but more modest forms, nimble, clever, resourceful. In an environment of darkness and scarcity, survival favored not size, but adaptability. In the seas, the consequences of continental drift were equally profound. As new oceans opened, new coastlines formed, providing nurseries for marine life. The South Atlantic, narrow though it was, became home to marine reptiles and fish that spread into its widening waters. Ammonites still drifted in spirals through the seas, their shells etched in intricate patterns, each design the mark of its species. Mosasaurs had not yet risen to dominance, but ichthyosaurs and pliosaurs remained formidable. Sharks, too, flourished, filling niches both old and new. The rearrangement of continents reshaped ocean currents. These currents, in turn, carried warmth and nutrients differently, influencing where reefs could form, where plankton could bloom, and where predators might thrive. The Earth's surface, both land and sea, was a puzzle constantly being reassembled, each move changing the rules of life. Plant life mirrored these shifts. As South America and Africa diverged, so too did their floras. Conifers remained dominant in many regions, but angiosperms, flowering plants, were beginning their quiet revolution. First appearing in the early Cretaceous, these plants spread rapidly, their flowers attracting insects for pollination. It is hard to overstate their significance. Before angiosperms, plants relied on wind and water to spread their pollen. With flowers, they recruited animals into the task. This partnership between plant and pollinator sparked a coevolutionary dance that continues to this day. Small, delicate, almost unnoticeable at first, flowers transformed landscapes. They diversified into grasses, shrubs, fruit-bearing trees, all descendants of these early blooms. While sauropods towered over forests and predators roared through plains, the quiet spread of flowers was perhaps the most enduring change of all. The humor of Earth's story is that it often favors the small and the subtle. The giants of Gondwana captured the imagination, Argentinosaurus, Spinosaurus, Gigantosaurus. But the humble flowering plant, with its colorful lure and sweet nectar, reshaped ecosystems more profoundly than any predator's tooth. And so while continents cracked and drifted, while predators evolved ever sharper claws and teeth, tiny petals and pollen grains began writing the next chapter of life. If one were to travel across Gondwana's remnants during this age, the differences would be striking. In Africa, sail-backed hunters stalked rivers. In South America, sauropod herds thundered across plains. In Antarctica, small feathered dinosaurs endured months of dim twilight. The supercontinent was gone, and in its place were lands, each growing stranger, each writing their own stories. What had once been a single chorus of life was now a symphony of many movements, each continent playing its own tune. Yet beneath it all, the earth still moved. Gondwana was not finished breaking apart. Australia would one day separate from Antarctica. India would slam into Asia, pushing up mountains that scraped the skies. South America would drift farther west, opening oceans vast enough to span with weeks of sailing. The breakup of Gondwana was not simply a geological event. It was a reshaping of life itself, a scattering of seeds across the globe, each carried on a drifting raft of land. It began almost quietly, so softly that for millions of years the world hardly seemed to notice. In forests of conifers and cycads, among ferns that had dominated the understories for ages, new shoots appeared. Their leaves were different, broader, sometimes more delicate, and their reproductive strategy was something unprecedented. These were the first angiosperms, the flowering plants. Unlike their ancestors who relied on the scatter of wind or water to carry their pollen, flowering plants devised a partnership. They grew blossoms, subtle at first, then more elaborate. They offered nectar and color, and in exchange for these gifts, insects came to them. The deal was simple. The insect took food, the plant's pollen clung to its body, and was carried faithfully to the next bloom. This partnership seems almost obvious to us now, but it was revolutionary then. Plants and insects locked into a dance that would ripple through every corner of the biosphere. Without intending it, flowers had recruited couriers, and those couriers multiplied their success beyond measure. The insects were ready. They had been experimenting with wings and mandibles for hundreds of millions of years. Beetles, dragonflies, and cockroaches had all flourished before the rise of flowers. But the appearance of nectar and pollen provided opportunities too good to ignore. Soon, bees, descendants of wasp-like ancestors, appeared, finely tuned for gathering pollen. Their fuzzy bodies carried more than enough grains to ensure fertilization. Butterflies and moths, too, extended proboscises that could reach deep into floral tubes, sipping nectar while moving pollen with delicate precision. Even flies and beetles, less elegant in their approach, found roles as pollinators. Each new plant that evolved a bloom attracted new insects. Each insect that found a bloom adapted a little more finely to it. Evolution spun an intricate web of relationships, weaving flowers and insects into mutual dependence. For animals that browse the land, this shift meant new food sources. Fruit, seeds, and later grasses. All would come from the flowering plant lineage. Herbivorous dinosaurs, once limited largely to cycads and conifers, found themselves nibbling on fresher, softer foliage. With fruiting plants, animals could now spread seeds farther afield, carrying them in stomachs and dropping them with fertilizer in distant places. The spread of flowers marked a quiet but dramatic ecological revolution. Forests diversified, open plains began to form, and the diets of creatures both large and small changed forever. There is a gentle humor in how the smallest innovations often yield the largest consequences. While the great dinosaurs battled for dominance and the continents drifted into new positions, the humble flower was staging the greatest coup of all. Giants may roar and vanish, but petals endure. Imagine the early Cretaceous landscape, where towering sauropods passed among groves of conifers, their necks reaching high. At their feet, unnoticed, a patch of flowers bloomed, their colors faint in the dawn. Around them, small insects hovered, wings shimmering in the light. The sauropods, distracted by their height and hunger, hardly cared. Yet in those tiny blossoms was the future, a reshaping of life so profound that it would outlast every giant around them. In South America, flowers spread across plains where titans like Argentinosaurus roamed. Their seeds scattered widely, caught in the mud of giant footprints or drifting downstream in rivers. Insects buzzed, birds plucked at petals, and small mammals began to nibble fruits. Evolution was quietly diversifying the banquet table. In Africa, flowering plants crept into ecosystems where Spinosaurus fished. Here, too, they found allies in insects, and their blooms flourished along riverbanks. The air itself changed, as scents carried messages to pollinators, chemical invitations to come, sip, and serve. In Antarctica and Australia, the story unfolded under long twilight skies. Flowers here faced shorter growing seasons and weaker sunlight, but where they could bloom, they did. Even in the dimness, insects found them, and the cycle repeated. These southern lands, though cooler, still housed forests where blossoms tucked themselves beneath conifers and ferns, waiting for their chance. Birds, too, entered the story. Descended from small feathered theropods, they were quick and adaptable. Some began to sip nectar, spreading pollen as they moved from plant to plant. Their beaks, once tools for seizing insects, bent into shapes better suited for probing flowers. The beginnings of a partnership that would later produce hummingbirds and sunbirds were already underway. And mammals, those small, secretive creatures of the night, began their quiet participation. Some nibbled fruits, spreading seeds in their wanderings. Their diets diversified. just as their potential roles in ecosystems expanded. The Earth was becoming richer in connections, more intricate in its ecological webs. Flowers wove animals, insects, and climates into new arrangements. Geologically, the continent's drift helped accelerate this spread. As Gondwana's fragments separated, isolation fostered unique plant lineages. Some families of flowering plants thrived in South America, others in Africa, others in India or Australia. When later collisions occurred, India with Asia, North America with South America, these lineages met again, mingling and competing. The result was even greater diversity. It is almost as though the continents themselves were gardeners, moving pieces around on Earth's surface, letting seeds take root in one soil, then transplanting them elsewhere millions of years later. The insects responded with equal enthusiasm. Imagine a world before flowers. Insects searching endlessly for food, chewing leaves, or scavenging decay. Then suddenly nectar, energy-rich, sugar-laden, waiting in an open cup. It was irresistible. No wonder they flocked to it. No wonder they adapted quickly to exploit it. Dragonflies may have kept to their aerial hunting, but bees multiplied. Butterflies painted wings with color, and beetles found new niches. The skies hummed with life, not just predatory, but pollinating. If there had been ears attuned to it, the Cretaceous world would have sounded different from the Jurassic. No longer just the heavy thuds of giants and the shrieks of predators. Now there's a background drone, the soft buzz of wings moving from bloom to bloom, the subtle chorus of pollinators shaping the planet. The flowering plants brought another consequence: grasses, which appeared late in the Cretaceous. Though at first rare and modest, they would one day transform landscapes into vast savannas and prairies. Dinosaurs likely nibbled early grasses, but it would be mammals, horses, antelope, bison that would later thrive upon them. The seeds of future ecosystems were literally being planted. The Earth's climate during this age remained warm, greenhouse-like, with high sea levels. Inland seas spread across continents. On the western interior of North America, for instance, a vast shallow sea cut the land in two, connecting the Arctic Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico. Along its shores, flowering plants established themselves, mingling with ferns and cycads. Dinosaurs like duck-billed hadrosaurs grazed these plants. Their complex teeth adapted for grinding the softer vegetation. In Asia, forests grew lush, and flowering plants spread rapidly along river valleys. Ceratopsians, the horned dinosaurs, traveled in herds, cropping plants that increasingly included angiosperms. The relationship between plant and herbivore tightened, with each influencing the other's evolution. It is almost humorous that the great drama of drifting continents, rising mountains, and prowling predators is often overshadowed in hindsight by the quiet work of flowers. They did not roar, they did not thunder, they did not dominate the skyline. Yet, they altered diets, landscapes, and pollinators. They rewrote ecosystems not by force, but by seduction. And perhaps that is their secret. While teeth and claws end with death, petals promise continuity. Each bloom whispers of renewal, of seeds to be carried, of future generations. In a world where giants fought and fell, the flowers simply persisted. By the late Cretaceous, the revolution was undeniable. Meadows and forests teemed with blossoms. Insects diversified wildly. Birds fluttered from flower to flower. Mammals, though still small, found new opportunities in fruits and seeds. The world was beginning to look strangely familiar, still full of dinosaurs, yes, but also echoing patterns we know today. If one squinted past the titanic reptiles, one might almost mistake a Cretaceous field for a modern one. Flowers in bloom, bees buzzing, birds calling. The reign of the giants continued, but the groundwork for their successors was being laid quietly beneath their feet, while flowers were changing the look and feel of Earth's ecosystems. Another quiet story was unfolding in the shadows. Beneath the feet of dinosaurs, under ferns and within burrows, small creatures scurried, warm-blooded fur-covered, and mostly overlooked. These were the mammals, and though their bodies were modest in size, their potential was vast. The age of reptiles still roared around them. Titanosaurs shook the ground as they walked. Tyrannosaurs ruled the land with tooth and claw. Pterosaurs glided across the skies, and marine reptiles dominated the oceans. Against such spectacle, the mammals seemed like afterthoughts, tiny nocturnal survivors, darting into the open only when danger passed. And yet, it is in quiet corners that some of the most important changes take place. Most early mammals of the Cretaceous were no larger than a rat or shrew. They gnawed insects, cracked seeds, and hunted small prey. Their senses were keen, particularly their hearing, refined by delicate middle ear bones that once belonged to reptilian jaws. Their fur insulated them, letting them thrive in cooler niches and nighttime environments. Some dug burrows for protection. Others climbed trees in search of fruit or insects. A few even took to the water, paddling after fish. Each small innovation expanded the possibilities of what mammals could become. It might seem strange that such tiny animals could matter in a world of giants. But survival is not always about size or power. In fact, the very scale of dinosaurs may have left gaps in the ecosystem, openings that smaller, faster, more adaptable animals could exploit. Where a tyrannosaur needed an entire herd to sustain it, a mouse-sized mammal could live on beetles or seeds alone. Flexibility was their advantage. Mammals ate almost anything. Their teeth, shaped for cutting, grinding, and crushing, allowed them to adjust to whatever food was available. While dinosaurs specialized, duckbills for grinding, ceratopsians for shearing, theropods for tearing. Mammals kept their options open. The continents, too, were helping mammals prepare for the future. As Pangaea's remnants drifted farther apart, ecosystems fractured. Isolated populations of mammals evolved separately in South America, Africa, Asia, and Australia. Each continent became a laboratory of adaptation. In South America, small marsupial-like mammals appeared, carrying their young in pouches. In Asia, placental mammals were experimenting with longer pregnancies, allowing young to be born more developed. These different strategies would later compete when continents reconnected. Isolation also provided safety. Dinosaurs, though dominant, could not be everywhere at once. In remote corners, mammals carved out quiet refuges where they faced fewer threats. The climate of the Cretaceous remained warm and humid, with high sea levels. Inland seas created coastlines rich with food. Mammals prowled these margins, hunting crustaceans and insects. In forests, they climbed among branches that now held flowers and fruits. Some mammals began to specialize in eating these fruits, inadvertently spreading seeds as they traveled, partners in the flower and plant expansion. It is almost humorous to imagine. While a giant hadrosaur munched its way through an entire grove, a squirrel-sized mammal might scurry off with a single berry. Yet that berry, carried and dropped elsewhere, might start a new colony of plants. The great beasts ate in bulk, but the small ones helped spread life with more precision. The senses of mammals were another secret strength. Their eyes adapted for dim light, their whiskers sensitive to the faintest touch, their noses alive with scent. At night, when predators rested, mammals came alive. The world of darkness belonged to them, a quieter stage where they could forage and mate beyond the gaze of dinosaurs. Insects hummed, flowers released fragrance, and small mammals followed the scents. Tiny shadows in a giant world. Some of the mammals' earliest experiments in form now look like whispers of the future. Tiny gliders stretched membranes between their limbs to leap from tree to tree. Small burrowers evolved claws that hinted at future moles. Semi-aquatic forms paddled through ponds, ancestors of creatures that one day would become otters and whales. None of these experiments dominated in their time. They were curiosities, side notes in the grand story of the Cretaceous. But they showed what was possible. Evolution was drafting blueprints, waiting for the moment when these designs could expand. There is a gentle irony here. The mammals lived under constant threat, yet that very threat shaped their adaptability. To survive among giants, they had to be clever, cautious, and versatile. They learned to hide, to diversify their diets, to breed quickly. In a sense, the dinosaurs were their teachers, pushing them into roles that would later help them flourish. If the world had been gentle, perhaps mammals would have remained simple insect eaters. But because it was harsh, because danger lurked at every step, they became resilient. In silence and smallness they prepared. Meanwhile, birds, descended from theropod dinosaurs, were also diversifying. Some remained fierce predators. Others grew smaller, more delicate, feeding on seeds and insects. Their hollow bones and feathers allowed them to colonize niches mammals could not reach. In many ways, birds and mammals mirrored each other. Both were warm-blooded. Both cared for their young. Both were adaptable. They represented a different path from the reptiles around them, and both would endure, even when the great reptiles did not. As continents drifted, future collisions loomed. India was racing northward toward Asia. South America and North America edged closer, though still divided by sea. Africa moved toward Europe. Each of these movements promised new exchanges of species, new waves of competition. Mammals, with their ability to adapt, would benefit greatly when these exchanges occurred. The seeds of future dominance were being planted, even if no one, neither dinosaur nor mammal, could sense it yet. It is tempting to see the mammals as waiting in line, as if they knew their time would come. But nature does not plan ahead. It only experiments endlessly with form and function. The mammals were simply surviving, day by day, in the cracks left between the giants. Their survival strategies happened to be flexible ones, and that flexibility, when the time came, proved decisive. One might say the mammals were like actors rehearsing in the wings, while the dinosaurs held the stage. No one expected them to star. Yet when the curtain fell suddenly on the giants, the smaller creatures were ready to step forward. The humor of history is that we often celebrate the loudest and largest, while the quiet and small endure. Tyrannosaurus may have ruled its realm, but it vanished. A mouse-like mammal unnoticed would give rise to humans who could one day look back and tell this very story. Even now, if you listen in the night, you can hear echoes of that age. The rustle of a mouse, the flap of a bat, the chirp of a shrew, tiny sounds that began in the shadow of dinosaurs, but which carried forward to dominate the world long after the giants fell. The end of the Cretaceous still lay ahead, with its sudden catastrophe. But by then, the groundwork was set. Flowers covered the land. Insects buzzed in intricate dances of pollination. Birds soared and sang. Mammals in countless small forms waited and adapted. The stage was built. The actors were in place. And soon, in the blink of a geological eye, the spotlight would shift. The age of dinosaurs had stretched across more than 150 million years. They had survived volcanic upheavals, shifting continents and changing climates. They seemed indestructible, woven into every corner of Earth's ecosystems. And yet, in a single violent moment, the world they knew came to an end. The stage was the late Cretaceous. About 66 million years ago, North America was home to hadrosaurs and horned giants. Tyrannosaurs prowled the plains. South America carried its own predators and unique sauropods. Birds filled the skies, flowering plants covered the ground, and mammals scurried quietly in the shadows. Life was abundant, diverse, and thriving. Then, from the darkness of space, came the asteroid. It was about 10 kilometers wide, a mountain flying at tens of thousands of kilometers per hour. Against the vastness of space, it was small. Against Earth, it was catastrophic. The asteroid struck near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, creating the Chicxulub crater. The impact released energy equivalent to billions of nuclear bombs. In an instant, forests ignited, seas boiled at their edges, and shock waves raced around the globe. If you could imagine standing anywhere on Earth at that moment, the air itself would have trembled. The sound was beyond thunder, beyond explosion. It was the sound of a planet absorbing a wound. The immediate destruction was immense. Everything within hundreds of kilometers of the impact site was incinerated. Forests flattened, coastlines shattered, animals vaporized. But the true catastrophe unfolded in the atmosphere. Dust, ash, and vaporized rock billowed into the sky, blocking sunlight. Soot from wildfires added to the haze. Within days, Earth grew dark. Photosynthesis faltered. Plants withered. Food chains collapsed. Dinosaurs built for abundance suddenly faced famine. Herbivores found nothing to graze. Carnivores, in turn, found no prey. Giants that had once needed tons of food each week now starved. It was not only dinosaurs. Marine reptiles perished as plankton vanished. Pterosaurs, already struggling, disappeared entirely. Entire groups of plants, insects, and fish were lost. This was one of the great mass extinctions in Earth's history, erasing around 75% of species. And yet, even in the darkness, some survived. Small size was an advantage. Mammals, birds, and certain reptiles managed to endure by eating whatever they could find, seeds, insects, carrion. Creatures that needed less food had better chances. Those able to burrow underground or live in water found shelter from fire and cold. Birds, with their seeds and diverse diets, outlived their pterosaur cousins. Crocodiles, slow but patient, waited out the famine in rivers and swamps. Mammals, adaptable as ever, scurried in the ruins finding scraps. The irony of evolution is that the mighty often fall hardest. The dinosaurs, so perfectly tuned for their world, were undone by its sudden collapse. The small, the overlooked, the modest, these carried life forward. For months, perhaps years, Earth was shrouded in gloom. Temperatures plummeted. Acid rain fell. Ash drifted across continents. It was a world of silence, broken only by the crackle of dying fires and the distant calls of survivors. When sunlight finally returned, it revealed an empty stage. The great dinosaurs were gone. Only the lineage of birds remained as their living descendants. Forests regrew, seas calmed, and life began slowly to diversify once more. From the perspective of geology, It was a blink of an eye. One day, tyrannosaurs ruled. The next, they were gone. But from the perspective of mammals, it was the opening of a door. In the emptiness left by giants, opportunities flourished. Where once a sauropod blocked the canopy, mammals could now climb and feed. Where tyrannosaurs once prowled, small predators could expand. The catastrophe that ended one reign became the foundation of another. It is difficult not to reflect on the strangeness of it. Had the asteroid missed, dinosaurs might still dominate. Mammals might have remained small and timid, never given the chance to grow large. Humans might never have appeared. Our very existence is tied to a rock from space. A chance collision shaped the course of life. What feels inevitable, the rise of mammals, the dawn of humanity, was in truth a fragile accident. There is a soft humor in this realization. The rulers of the earth, with teeth and claws, were toppled not by battle, not by competition, but by an uninvited guest from the stars. The dinosaurs never saw it coming, and the mammals never expected the gift. The Chicxulub crater still lies buried under Mexico, its outline faint but real. Scientists have drilled into it, studied shock quartz, traced the iridium layer left by the impact. Each clue confirms the story of that day. It is written in stone, ash, and fossil, and the fossils tell the contrast. Above the boundary layer, no more non-avian dinosaurs. Below it, bones of creatures that had reigned for ages. In between a thin line of ash, the dividing mark between two worlds. From the ashes, the survivors began to rebuild. Mammals diversified rapidly. In a few million years, a brief moment geologically, new forms emerged. Hooved grazers, predators, primates. Birds, too, expanded, filling skies with songs and shapes. The world, once dominated by reptilian forms, was now a canvas for warm-blooded experiment. Life had not ended. It had transformed. The story of Pangaea had long since shifted. The supercontinent was no more. The world had fractured into continents that looked closer to our modern map. Yet the echoes of Pangaea's unity still shaped ecosystems. The lineages scattered across those drifting lands would carry forward the memory of ancient connections. And now, after the fire and darkness of the Cretaceous end, the stage belonged to the quiet survivors. Imagine that silence after the storm. Forest charred, seas murky, air heavy with soot. And yet, somewhere in that darkness, a mouse-like creature curls in its burrow. It breathes, it waits, it emerges. Its eyes blink at the dim light. Its nose twitches at the scent of seeds. This small life, fragile and unremarkable, represents the thread unbroken. From it a new story begins. The age of reptiles was not gone forever. Crocodiles still lurked. Lizards still sunned themselves. Turtles paddled slowly. Birds, the heirs of dinosaurs, still beat their wings across the sky. But the balance had shifted. The mammals, once the audience in the shadows, now stepped into the light. Their time had come not by triumph, but by persistence. When the smoke cleared and the skies slowly brightened, Earth was not the same planet it had been before. The giants were gone. Tyrannosaurs no longer thundered across plains. Triceratops no longer grazed in herds. The air seemed empty without their calls, and the forest seemed still without their movements. Yet silence, as nature often shows, is never permanent. Into the space left behind, life began to creep forward again. At first it was cautious. Tiny mammals emerged from burrows, blinking at a changed world. They had survived not through strength, but through adaptability, by hiding, eating little, and waiting out disaster. And now, their patience was rewarded. The early Cenozoic, the age that followed extinction, began quietly. The planet was scarred. Forests had burned, seas had been clouded with ash, and ecosystems were broken. But Earth is nothing if not persistent. Plants returned first. Ferns spread quickly, carpeting the ground in green, as they often do after mass extinctions. Then trees followed, reclaiming the land with roots and leaves. Where greenery spread, animals followed. Insects returned, buzzing among flowers. Fish refilled rivers. Birds lifted into open skies. And mammals, once no larger than a modern raccoon, began to explore possibilities. They were not yet the lions, elephants, and whales we know. Instead, they were strange prototypes, experimenting with shapes. Some looked like shrew-like insect eaters, scurrying under roots. Others had teeth fit for grinding leaves. A few grew larger, cautiously testing new roles in ecosystems no longer ruled by reptiles. The freedom was immense. With the dinosaurs gone, entire ecological niches were vacant. Where there had once been towering sauropods eating trees, now mammals could rise to graze. Where giant predators had once prowled, now small carnivores could expand. It was as if the stage had been cleared and the script rewritten. The continents, by this time, were closer to their modern outlines. North America and Eurasia had split, but still held connections. South America drifted further into isolation. Africa was separating from Europe, while India was racing north toward Asia. Australia began its lonely slide eastward. This shifting map meant one important thing. Mammals evolving on one landmass often stayed there, shaped by local conditions. South America, for example, became a land of oddities. Giant flightless birds, armadillo-like creatures, and sloths of massive size. Australia, cut off early, became a kingdom of marsupials, with kangaroo ancestors, pouch predators, and koalas clinging to trees. Africa and Eurasia hosted their own dramas, giving rise to elephants, rhinos, and eventually apes. It was a patchwork, a quilt of experiments scattered across drifting lands. In the early days, most mammals were small, but over millions of years, they expanded into forms that would seem both familiar and bizarre. There were intercuthers, enormous hornless relatives of rhinos, taller than giraffes and heavier than elephants. There were brontotheres, with strange forked horns sprouting from their snouts. South America grew giant ground sloths, as heavy as cars, lumbering through forests. Some mammals even returned to the seas. Descendants of hoofed land animals ventured into shallow waters, chasing fish. Over time, their legs shortened, their bodies streamlined, and their nostrils slid backward. These were the ancestors of whales and dolphins, turning the ocean into their new domain. The irony of whales, that the largest animals to ever live on Earth are mammals, not reptiles, comes from this quiet, adaptive adventure. The forests, meanwhile, were changing. The Paleocene and Eocene epochs saw the rise of dense tropical woodlands across much of the world. Palms, figs, and magnolias filled the air with scents. Early primates appeared here, swinging among branches, feeding on fruit, and developing sharper vision for navigating trees. One might smile at the thought. While mighty mammals like brontotheres stomped across the plains, tiny lemur-like primates quietly practiced balancing, gripping, and thinking. They were not remarkable yet, but they were the seeds of a lineage that would one day look up at the stars. The climate during much of this time was warm and lush. Ice was absent from the poles. Seas lapped high upon the continents, creating inland waterways. Crocodiles basked in the Arctic. Palm trees grew where snow now falls. It was a greenhouse Earth, a reminder of how different climates can be across time. But warmth has a way of pushing boundaries. In the Eocene, about 50 million years ago, temperatures spiked dramatically in an event called the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. Global warming on a massive scale transformed ecosystems. Some animals thrived, others vanished. Mammals responded by shrinking in size. Small bodies cope better with heat. Horses, for instance, began as creatures no bigger than a fox. It is a soft irony of nature. In hot times, creatures often become small and delicate. In cooler times, they grow large and sturdy. Earth's thermostat guides evolution as surely as teeth or claws. As time passed, climates shifted again. Cooling returned, ice crept back toward poles, and grasslands began to spread. Forests, once dominant, gave way in many regions to open plains, and mammals adapted once more. Grazers developed high-crowned teeth for chewing tough grasses. Predators grew fast and lean to chase them. Herds began to thunder across landscapes in patterns we recognize today. The age of mammals was in full swing. One might wonder, did reptiles vanish entirely from dominance? Not at all. Crocodiles still ruled rivers. Snakes spread widely, some reaching enormous sizes. Lizards adapted into countless forms. And birds, those winged heirs of dinosaurs, continued to thrive, from tiny songbirds to massive flightless hunters. But mammals, with their warm blood, live births, and social behaviors, took the leading roles in most ecosystems. They were adaptable, clever, and diverse. From bat wings to elephant trunks, from kangaroo pouches to whale songs, mammals wrote a story of variety. If you stood on Earth around 30 million years ago, you would see a world both familiar and alien. Plains filled with antelope-like creatures, but not yet antelopes. Forests filled with monkey-like creatures, but not yet monkeys as we know them. Predators stalked with saber-shaped teeth, some of them ancestors of cats, others unrelated but shaped by the same pressures. The cast was recognizable, but the costumes were experimental. It was as if nature had drawn sketches before finalizing designs. What remained constant was change itself. Continents drifted further. India collided with Asia, pushing up the Himalayas, the highest mountains on Earth. South America remained isolated, brewing its unique fauna. Africa connected with Eurasia, allowing waves of animals to cross. The Atlantic widened, pulling Europe and America apart. Every shift in land brought migrations, extinctions, and opportunities. The legacy of Pangaea's ancient unity still echoed. Species that had once walked side by side were now evolving apart, diverging into unique forms. And through it all, primates grew more complex. Their hands grasped branches, their eyes tracked fruit, their brains slowly enlarged. They were not yet human, not even close, but the thread was there, a quiet preparation unfolding in shadows. It is tempting to laugh at the thought. While mammoths-to-be were learning how to grow fur, and whales-to-be were learning how to sing, our ancestors were simply learning how not to fall out of trees. Evolution is patient, but also practical. The age of mammals had no single climax. Instead, it was a gradual expansion, a steady occupation of Earth's open spaces. It was not as dramatic as the fall of dinosaurs, not as sudden as an asteroid. It was quieter, gentler, yet just as powerful. Step by step, hoof by hoof, claw by claw, mammals remade the Earth. If you were to walk the Earth today, you would find a planet that feels complete, as though it has always been this way. Oceans divide continents into familiar shapes. Mountains rise where they have stood for millions of years. Forests stretch across equators. Deserts sprawl near horse latitudes, and ice grips the poles. It is easy to believe the map has always looked like this. Yet every coastline, every mountain range, every rift valley is a reminder of movement. The continents still drift, though slowly, just a few centimeters each year. And in their drifting, they carry echoes of the time when everything was one. That time was Pangaea. And though the supercontinent broke apart more than 175 million years ago, its legacy surrounds us. By the late Cenozoic, the world was settling into a form closer to our own. Grasslands dominated much of the earth, giving rise to vast herds of grazers. Horses, antelope, bison. Predators sharpened in turn, cats with retractable claws, wolves with social hunts, hyenas with bone-crushing jaws. Mammoths and mastodons marched across northern plains, their tusks curling like ivory crescents. Giant bears roamed woodlands. Sloths lingered in South America, some so large they could reach tree canopies. Australia remained its isolated stage of marsupial actors, while Africa carried elephants, giraffes, and great apes. Among those apes, in Africa's forests and savannas, a quiet shift began. Some stood more upright than others. Some shaped stones into tools. Some carried fire. They were us, though not yet as we know ourselves. The first humans were latecomers in Earth's grand performance. We appeared only a few million years ago, a blink compared to the reign of dinosaurs or even the slow wander of early mammals. Yet our impact has been swift, wide, and deep. Where once survival meant hiding from predators, humans became the predators. Where once we gazed at stars from under branches, we began to draw them in caves, to chart them, to imagine them as guides. We spread out step by step across every continent, from Africa into Europe and Asia, across land bridges into the Americas, and eventually across seas to islands and oceans. In doing so, we unknowingly reconnected the world in ways reminiscent of Pangaea's unity. It is curious to reflect. Pangaea joined the lands by geology. Humans joined them again by travel, culture, and trade. The oceans that had separated us became highways for ships. The skies that had been barriers became corridors for planes. In a sense, the ancient supercontinent's togetherness found a strange echo in our networks, our maps, our connections. Pangaea was a physical unity. Humanity's world is a cultural one. Both remind us that separation is temporary. Geologists tell us that continents will not stop. They are still on the move. In about 250 million years, Earth may host a new supercontinent. Some models call it Pangaea Proxima, others Nova Pangaea or Amasia. The exact form is uncertain, but the certainty lies in motion. Coasts will shift, oceans will close, mountains will rise where seas once rolled. If humans or our descendants are here to witness it, they will look upon a map utterly different from today's, yet strangely familiar, because the continents will once again be joined. And perhaps they will look back, as we do now, and imagine what life was like during the first Pangaea. The story of Earth, from molten beginnings to supercontinents to our present day, is not a tale of permanence. It is a tale of cycles. Land unites, then divides. Species rise, then fall. Climate warms, then cools. Oceans advance, then retreat. Life adapts, survives, reshapes, and begins again. It is this rhythm that makes our moment both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary, because it is one beat in an ancient pulse. Extraordinary, because we are aware of it. Dinosaurs ruled, but did not reflect. Mammoths thrived, but did not remember. We, however, can look at a rock and see millions of years written within it. We can look at a fossil and imagine a living creature. We can look at a continent and know it was once joined to another. We are not merely living in the present. We are remembering the past and imagining the future. When you stand at a beach and watch the tide come in, you are watching more than water. You are watching the product of a planet that has been sculpted and reshaped for billions of years. The grains of sand under your feet may once have been part of a mountain in Pangaea, or part of a desert in Gondwana, or part of a seabed in an ocean long gone. When you climb a hill, you may be walking on what was once the floor of a sea. When you see a bird, you are watching the living legacy of dinosaurs. When you breathe, you are drawing air shaped by forests that have risen and fallen countless times. We live surrounded by echoes. Gentle humor helps place our scale. Consider this. The Earth has rotated more than 1 trillion times since Pangaea broke apart. And yet, many of us complain when waiting 2 minutes at a traffic light. Time for us is short. For Earth, it is indulgently long. Or think of this. Continents drift at roughly the speed your fingernails grow. Each year, North America inches farther from Europe by about 2.5 centimeters. You might not notice, but if you were very patient and very determined, you could measure it without leaving your desk, simply by waiting a few lifetimes. We are small creatures living on a giant stage that moves more slowly than we can perceive. And yet, in our smallness, we notice. That noticing is our gift. As this story of Pangaea closes, let it rest with you like a calm tide. Earth has been many things: a fireball, a snowball, a supercontinent, a world of dinosaurs, a world of mammals. It has shifted, cracked, burned, and frozen. And yet, it has always found a way forward. We, too, are part of that way forward. Our lives are not separate from geology and biology. They are threads woven into the same long fabric. So, as you drift now in thought, picture the ancient supercontinent. Picture endless forests under one sun, deserts stretching without boundary, seas curving around a single mass of land. Picture creatures unlike any alive today, moving across open plains. Picture Earth not as it is, but as it was, and as it will be again someday. If you find peace in this reflection, let it stay with you. And if you enjoy wandering through these quiet histories, gently support this channel by liking and subscribing, so more stories may reach you in the stillness of night. Rest now, knowing the Earth will continue its slow dance, carrying all of us across time, as it always has.